The Speaker.
Member for Naprima?
Madam Speaker,
Member Lee, I'm quite aware of what was, but the member is not here.
And?
Member for Naprima?
Go ahead. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I listened intently to my colleague from La Hoqueta Talparo, and I must say that he was more articulate than the rest of the speakers on that side, in particular the member for Lafayette West. Madam Speaker, we are here once again to debate a most important piece of legislation. Our debate comes in the wake of two high-profile searches, one against a visiting Jamaican artist, Buju Banton, and the others against 7 families in the Gulfview area. These families, seemingly successful, going about their lives, in a sense of the view that they were immune to these kinds of activities, but they were searched nevertheless. And these searches were presumably based on faulty intelligence, since nothing incriminating was found. Both searches were premised on faulty intel, presumably, and it could have been supplied by a whistleblower or whistleblowers. And if that is the case, who were these whistleblowers? What could have been their motives? And what recourse do these families and Buju have against these whistleblowers, if indeed they were malicious? When will these whistleblowers be charged, and if at all, can they be charged? When we look at Clause 20, Section 1 and 2 of this bill, which speaks only to the immunities to the whistleblower. It says no immunity to whistleblower if he was the perpetrator or accomplice. However, nowhere in the legislation we see any attempt to balance the effects of the whistleblowers with the fact that you could have in our society some whistleblowers who may have malicious intent. So our first recommendation is that this bill must forthwith be amended to make it a criminal offense, plain and simple, for a whistleblower to maliciously and knowingly provide false information to either the police or the whistleblowing reports unit. Madam Speaker, whistleblowers are not always saints, and this legislation operates on that assumption. See it clause after clause after clause. Weinberg, writing in Forbes 2005, an article entitled "The Dark Side of Whistleblowing," reports the case of a whistleblower who was in a position to prevent the actions that were the subject of the lawsuit. But instead of preventing them, he watched quietly, collected information to build his case. Stories abound, Madam Speaker, of disgruntled, fired employees who felt that they were hard done by an organization and who come out to bust mark to gain revenge. We know about that. I think all of us in our previous incarnations would be aware of situations like that. Madam Speaker, it brings me to the question, who were the whistleblower or blowers in Emailgate? If he or she acted maliciously, what would be the sanctions against him or her as prescribed in this bill? Nothing. And can it readily and unambiguously used as a remedy in justified circumstances, such as Emailgate? So we have a sitting Prime Minister accused of conspiracy to murder. She lost a general election in part because of it, and a whistleblower enjoys the spoils of his or her calumny and mischief. Punishments for malicious whistleblowing must be unambiguously clear, or right-thinking citizens may come to believe that we are about to legitimize and protect bacchanal, old talk, commerce, minty alley gossip, and even political victimization. And more so, when legitimate questions are asked, we hear obfuscatory, inherently foolish, novel legal concepts, and I quote, like looking beyond the four square of the evidence. Madam Speaker, we know our country and we know how we operate. As they say in the dialect, we know how things go down here. Let us look at clause 19, which grants immunity from civil and disciplinary proceedings for having made a disclosure. Let's assume the employee subsequent to making the disclosure does not perform on the job or is habitually absent. What is to stop the employee 3 years down the line from saying,
I don't want to interrupt you, but I'm just reminding you of Standing Order 4410. Okay?
what is to stop the employee from saying 3 or 4 years down the line, Madam Speaker, that the firing was originally caused by the fact that the person was a whistleblower in the organization? And clause 18 states, inter alia, and I quote, a whistleblower shall not be subject to detrimental action on account of his having made a protected disclosure. But research shows, and as pointed out in an article published in October 17, 2015, in the issue of the International Journal of Health Policy and Management, that legal actions are oftentimes not always effective. The article goes on to state, and I quote, employers have a multitudes of methods for ending an employment relationship without actually firing an employee. By making the employee's job more difficult, by giving the employees the least desirable task or hours to work, or refusing to promote an employee, or otherwise making the employee feel unwelcome. And the article says organizations can effectively end an employment relationship while still following the letter of the law. So we may think in this legislation that we are giving certain immunities and protections on the job to an employee. But all of us know that, and as the research shows, that it is very possible to follow the letter of the law and still make the life of a whistleblower who is an employee, make his or her life very difficult. And today we witness not well thought out, slipshod, sloppy, and careless legislation brought before this House with minimal consultation, a unilaterally imposed sense of urgency that suggests that we should pass bad law for the sake of showing the world and local voters that we are dealing with crime, even as we recorded 49 murders last month, the highest in our history, and 25% more than what was recorded in April 2018. Madam Speaker, we have repeatedly said, and we will say it again, we will not be co-conspirators in passing bad law in this Parliament. We have said that. Well-conceived whistleblowing legislation is an important tool in a country's arsenal, used in the prevention and detection of serious misconduct such as fraud and corruption, which can lead to financial loss and reputational damage. Some of the world's largest financial frauds, as the well-known Enron and WorldCom cases in the US, were detected through using whistleblowers. And whistleblowing is so important in the United States, Madam Speaker, that some regulators, the Department of Justice and the Securities Exchange Commission, under the Dodd-Frank Act, offer financial incentives to whistleblowers who provide original information, which leads to successful prosecutions. Madam Speaker, I have serious reservations about supporting this bill. Madam Speaker, and I will provide my reasons seriatim. In the first place, the bill calls for a 3/5 majority. I've said it previously, and I'll say it again, that the framers of our Constitution wanted a responsible, reasonable, and sensible engagement of the opposition and the government. to provide a consensus, which ultimately would lead to better legislation. There must be, for this legislation, and I'm speaking here specifically of that clause, there must be a capacity to disagree in a peaceful, professional, and in a consistent and respectful manner. And I ask the question, how can the UNC support legislation when there are constant insults from the government side? Madam Speaker, I refer to Hansard, December 6, 2017, and I refer to the member for Laventille West. He said, and I quote, "But you see, the UNC believes that crime is a PNM problem and not a national problem. And that is why we describe them as unpatriotic without apology." Now, Madam Speaker, I ask the question, and I know my friend from Point Fortin always say, join with us. But you cannot join with us, as Lloyd Best used to say. You beat up the wife, you beat her till she basically. You give her some flowers and a glass of champagne and tell us, well, let us be peaceful and let us have a loving relationship. It does not work so. On page, the member for Aruka Maloney, on page, this is Hansard, 6 December 2017, page 359, and I quote, "Despite the unpatriotic display of those opposite, we will continue to act in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago." Member for St. Joseph, "I recommend something instead of just opposing for the sake of opposition." Page 118. It gets worse. San Fernando West, Eddie MP, page January 11, 2019, page 222, Hansard. Quote, "I sat down here and listened in utter shock and amazement and feel a deep sense of embarrassment that somebody that represented this country at the international level as the member for Naparima could and did," and he went on and on and on. And Madam Speaker, it is scandalous. It is a dereliction of intellectual duty and every other form of duty for Naparima, and he goes on. Madam Speaker, we don't support a situation where one side could ad hominemly attack those on our side and expect us to work together and in the interest of Trinidad and Tobago. We will, and we do, but we will do it only with good legislation. And Madam Speaker, I want to give them a little lecture on the role of the opposition. According to the European Commission for Democracy Through Law.
I understand the context. I've allowed you some leeway, but tie it quickly into the bill, please.
I'll tie it quickly.
Thank you.
I'll tie it quickly. And I will say that the European Commission says the extent to which the opposition in a parliamentary system is allowed to actually fulfill these functions can be seen as a sign of the democratic maturity of the country. I will go on to my second point, Madam Speaker. Once the bill is passed, we are told that it can be proclaimed with immediacy, and I'm referring to clause 2. This act comes into force on such date as is fixed by the President. Yeah. So, Madam Speaker, yes, my second clause is the question of immediacy. We have statements from the Attorney General in the press that it will be proclaimed with immediacy. So the question I ask is, who are we fooling? Clause 14.1, for example, tells us, quote, "A designated authority shall have a whistleblowing reports unit consisting of a director and such other officers as are required for the efficient performance of the functions of the unit," end of quote. So we have, and it has been said before, we have 21 designated units, authorities, and they're going to have to get qualified staff to fill the vacancies. But so far, we don't have job descriptions. We don't have job specifications and to fill these jobs. And how will they be appraised, these individuals that are recruited? Will they be provided on selection with performance standards upon which they would be appraised? A serious country would put in place these things to see whether we have the staff, what are the qualifications needed before passing the legislation. Will they be trained? I suspect that they will be hired. They will be hired and told survive as best as you could in the job, on the job. there will be no standardization.
Standard Order 55-1B. All of this was covered last week by the opposition. Please, thank you.
No, Madam Speaker. I'm making.
I always say I always understand your enthusiasm, but let me rule. I will allow you to continue.
Yeah. Will they be trained? And I suspect that there'll be no standardization across the 21 units and across the thousands that employers may choose to avail themselves of. Clause 2, Clause 11 deals with the appointment by companies of whistleblowing reporting officers. And we know what it states. But in Singapore, Madam Speaker, where they do things differently. And I quote, the revised Code of Corporate Governance recommends that paragraph 12.7 that audit committees, you see, we say that we shall establish internal reporting mechanisms. The Singaporeans do it differently. They say we have in our company laws existing audit committees. And in the United States, audit committees are necessary in all publicly traded companies. So what they do is the audit committee, they say, should review the policy and arrangements by which staff of the company and any other person in confidence may provide information and report on financial improprieties. The audit committee objective should be to ensure that arrangements are in place for such concerns to be raised and independently investigated. I think my colleague from Oropuch East raised the point about if I have a company and I own the company and I appoint my brother as the whistleblowing reporting officer, and somebody, an employee wants to report on me, it has to go through my brother, essentially. Now the Singaporeans have developed a system for an independent review, and there must be independent. And I'm saying that these things ought to be looked at in terms of the development of the framework legislation that we have. And so they have set up a system for independent investigation and for appropriate follow-up action to be taken. The existence of whistleblowing policy should be disclosed in the company's annual report, and procedures for raising such concerns should be publicly disclosed as appropriate. End of quote. But it's a little more than that. Employees in audit committees are encouraged to become certified by world-class accredited institutions, such as the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, in which there are 85,000 members, and they give certificates for persons who will do these kinds of investigations. So we have another society that has a structure, that has a system in place, that has training for staff, and has certification for staff. And we have a system where we say a company can develop an internal whistle reporting system, and we leave it as that. Madam Speaker, it was like long ago when you have a village cricket match and a captain will pick a side. And he will pick a side and he will tell us, gentlemen, the field is there, the two batsmen will just scatter on the field. And we go there and we scatter on the field and we do our own thing. This legislation seems to be suggesting a scattering approach to management that is inconsistent with a country that is aspiring to first world status. So this Attorney General will railroad this legislation. He will recruit people by VAPs with no requisite training and send them to survive in these organizations as best they could. And these whistleblowing reporting officers will scatter in organizations, underperform, do untold damage, but then we could zest and tell ourselves, Madam Speaker, that we created a suite of legislation to deal with crime. And Madam Speaker, I make the point that zesters exist in suits also, designer suits. My third problem.
I don't like the implication in that, so I'd ask you just to withdraw that and continue.
Zesters exist everywhere. Good. My third problem is that I do not trust this government in general.
Correct.
I don't trust them, and I don't trust this Attorney General in particular. Madam Speaker, I keep wondering sometimes whether the opposition benches are specially selected for targeted supervision. And I'll give you a reason why I'm saying that. I'll give you a reason. All right.
Member, I'm sure you don't want to go that way. Okay? I'm sure you don't want to go that way.
I'll take it out. I'll withdraw it, but I'll ask a question. Madam Speaker, every time I travel out of Trinidad and I return to the immigration office, and this is a fact, and I will ask them to check it. When I submit my passport to the immigration officer and he swipes it, picks up a phone, calls somebody.
Speaker standing order 48-6.
I'm giving a fact.
I'll let you continue.
Yeah. And I asked, Madam Speaker, I asked because I'm genuinely concerned. That's swiped, so a phone is picked up, and after a short conversation, I'm stamped and I'm sent on my way. And I thought this was what just everybody got that. So I asked my family and friends, and they said no. On the last two occasions, and I'll tell you, on the 23rd of February, when I arrived at 10:05 on flight number BW525, it occurred also on the 15th of March when I arrived from Fort Lauderdale. I'm talking weeks ago on flight number BW481. When on the last occasion I inquired of the immigration officer on duty, I was told that there was someone with a name similar to mine on our watch list. So help me God, that is the truth. And I asked myself, a watch list? How come I travel to the United States, to the UK, to St. Lucia and other places, and only in Trinidad and Tobago I'm subject to inquiries? And I have the question, to whom does the immigration officer speak? And you could check it out and you could clarify it later on. And the question I ask is, am I being monitored? And by whom and for what? And I move on. Madam Speaker, I move on. I do not trust. My second reason for not supporting this bill.
Members, I usually don't have difficulties in hearing the Honourable Member for Naparima. And could I ask the members who can't seem to contain their enjoyment of his presentation? I think maybe tea was just too good. All right, but we're back in here. So, Member for Naparima, please continue.
Thank you very much for your intervention.
About moving on. You're moving on.
Yes, I'm moving on.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, yes, I'll be calling sentence. That is that is what I speak about in terms of ad hominem disrespect, Madam Speaker. So I tell you why I do not, and I speak for 15,000 voters in Naparima constituency. And they could say what they want. Nobody on that side has that number of people who represented them. Madam Speaker, what is happening here is nothing strange. During the debate, and I'm saying this is my reason why I distrust. During the debate on the legal notice 185 concerning sanctions against Iran on January the 11th, 2019, the Attorney General deliberately ignored the fact that I acknowledged 3 times during my contribution that the Security Council Resolution 2231 was applicable to Iran and therefore to the debate. And I'm making this point, 1, to clear up Hansard, and 2,
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 48-1.
and 2, to support
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 48-1.
Okay. I would want to, Member, I sustain the objection with respect to relevance. Okay?
I go on, Madam Speaker. Except anyhow, I go on. Madam Speaker, this legislation will be just one of a suite of legislation that will create bottlenecks in our system and therefore be ineffective. So we are always being brought here to discuss legislation before putting the necessary systems and procedures in place in order to give effect to the legislation. Currently, there are bottlenecks in our judicial system. We have offices such as the Forensic Science Center and the DPP office are backed up with cases. The Forensic Science Center is understaffed. And I'm saying this, we have this piece of legislation before us that could burden the system. the forensic science, understaffed, lack pathologist, support staff, a lack of proper medical equipment and scalpels, cramped center, unsanitary conditions, and the DPP's office is understaffed, I understand, by 55% and more, and cramped.
Madam Speaker,
Time
Standing Order
spent-
48.1 and 55.1b, all of these matters were traversed last week.
But please continue.
Yeah. So, Madam Speaker, all we are saying is that perhaps it is better to deal with improve the existing infrastructure rather than going on to new legislation and bringing us here to further clutter a system that is overburdened and underperforming. Madam Speaker, in this kind of legislation, we want to ask, looking at Clause 7, reasonable grounds is a very open statement. It says, Clause 7.1, an employee of an organization may make a disclosure of improper conduct to a whistleblowing reporting officer or whistleblowing reports unit where he has reasonable grounds to believe that improper conduct has occurred, is occurring, or is likely to occur within the organization. Improper conduct here can mean, according to definitions in this bill, conduct that tends to show unfair discrimination on the basis of gender, race, place of origin, social class, color, religion, or political opinion. In a society such as Trinidad and Tobago, and my colleague from Chaguanas West alerted to the cultural context in which this legislation is being brought to us. In a society like Trinidad and Tobago, there's a culture of idle rumor and gossip in our society. Are we legitimizing a negative trait by providing an operationalized mechanism to facilitate this?
Now I will stand on tedious repetition. Almost every member on your side dealt with us legitimizing rumor, etc., gossip, and so on in different ways. So I'll ask you to develop a different.
I will go.
Yes,
I'll
please.
move on, Madam Speaker. Similarly, Clause 7.2c, there is no guarantee that the information given by a past employee is accurate. Clause 7.2c says, in respect of information acquired by the employee while he was in the employ of the organization, the issue opens the door for biased information being reported on a person who may be not guilty. Due to the fact that the information was given by a past employee can be problematic, especially if the employee was fired. It can be a question of, is the information 100% true and is it reliable? And it can be subjective, and we are saying that this opens up a floodgate of possible arrangements that could lead to abuse. Clause 7.4, how accurately will an oral disclosure be recorded? Clause 7.4 states, where, I quote, where a disclosure is made orally, the officer receiving the disclosure shall, A, reduce this disclosure immediately into writing in the presence of the person making the disclosure, and B, read the written disclosure to the person who made it. The question I ask is, are our officers trained to write reports that accurately reflect what the whistleblower has said? Madam Speaker, many of us have gone to police stations to give accident reports. And often what is written by the officer is not the same thing that you had said. Fortunately for some of us, we can read it and correct. But what happens if the person cannot read or write? And we will have situations like this where the whistleblower may not be literate. Information, Madam Speaker, can be modeled in the process of transcribing the oral report if it's not written word for word, or the whistleblower is unable to articulate his claims in a coherent manner. The whistleblower may be pressured to sign. And as I have been in police stations where the officer, when I tell the officer, I will write it and present it to you, and there's a measure of annoyance because it's making a judgment of his capacity to write. So you could feel pressured in order to sign. And we have to ask the question, what if the whistleblower cannot read or write? This can likely be the case if an oral report is made. He will not know whether the report written by the officer is accurate. And all we are saying is the need for training in order to in report writing to ensure that what is written is accurately reflective of what the whistleblower indicates. Madam Speaker, shall and may are used multiple times throughout these clauses, multiple times. In some cases, it can be interpreted in an ambiguous manner. I think it was raised by our representative for St. Augustine, who said shall means must. That is what I learned in school, and it was corrected by the member for Digo Martin Northeast in consultation with the member for Laventille, which says that it could mean in certain situations, shall could mean may.
So, Member for Naparima, your original 30 minutes are now spent. Your very last statement supports the point I would like to stand on, and that is Standing Order 55-1B with respect to tedious repetition. All right? So that, no, I don't want you to correct me. This is what I'm ruling. What you've said supports that. So please move on.
What I said was to make the point that in this legislation, we need to clarify when shall and must should be used. That was not me.
I invite you to move on, please. Are you finished?
I am on my feet, madam.
No. Please sit. All right? Please sit. I have taken note of your physical demeanor, and that's why I've asked you if you're finished. Next. I invite you to take your seat. Next person. I invite you to take your seat. Next speaker. Anybody else? Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As I join this debate as it relates to the act to combat corruption and other wrongdoing by encouraging and facilitating the disclosures of improper conduct in the public and private sector. Madam Speaker, I have listened very attentively to this particular debate as it relates to the intention of the government in relation to combating, or their mantra of combating corruption and focusing on the need to deal with the public purse and accountability to the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. And during the debate, the member for Laventille West, during his contribution, indicated that the legislation that went to the Joint Select Committee and where the opposition was very involved and so on, that the legislation would attempt to focus on providing protection to whistleblowers in the context of detrimental action and so on, Madam Speaker. And he indicated during his presentation that the witnesses, or a witness, whether it is from a criminal point of view or from a civil point of view, is the lifeblood to the judicial system in our country. And he indicated that the importance of the witness in the context of realizing a conviction, Madam Speaker. And he focused on the role of the state, and he went on to go in the direction of the Dolce matter, and he further attempted to underscore to this House and to the country that as a result of this particular legislation that witnesses or whistleblowers would have the support or the protection of the state, Madam Speaker. And in that context, because during his contribution, my colleague, the member for St. Augustine, had indicated that the lives of persons in this country has no value in terms of, it is public knowledge, it is out in the public domain, that persons are hired for as little as $500 and so on in relation to perpetrating a crime. And today I want to ask the government, what is their role in terms of giving that sense of comfort, that sense of support to persons who are potential whistleblowers? And I ask it in the context of headlines that I have read online today and in the newspapers, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just to highlight the point that I want to deal with is that only today, if you could give me a moment. Yes, Madam Speaker, I'm quoting that directly from Loop News, the 6th of May, 2019. Gunmen murder female state witness in Barataria, man hospitalized. A Barataria shooting left a 21-year-old woman dead, and it goes on to say that Ms. Franco was a state witness in a double murder, and also that the 22-year-old was murdered by person posing to be police officers of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. Whilst I have no facts or all the facts at my disposal, it causes a great sense of concern to me because the backbone of this piece of legislation is getting the ability of someone to come forward and make disclosures and to protect them against possible detrimental repercussions, Madam Speaker. And this is why I hope that in his winding up, that the Attorney General can provide some comfort to those potential persons that he and the government is trying to solicit to come forward in combating, as he said, corruption, which is the platform or the main pillar of this particular piece of legislation, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, whilst we may continue to focus on the big picture issue of corruption and dealing with the public purse and protecting the taxpaying public and so on against abuse and corruption, Madam Speaker, there are some issues that are in this bill that needs to be ventilated from what I would call an ordinary, from an ordinary person's point of view, and especially from the point of view of workers in Trinidad and Tobago. Because, Madam Speaker, it was pointed out that this bill will focus on the public and private sector. On the public and private sector, and it was further indicated that there are approximately 76,000 companies in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. And in this regard, there are some issues that I would want to ask the Attorney General to clarify for the benefit of all and sundry, and especially, as I would say, the workers in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this leads me to the point of the whole question of Part 2 of the bill, where it has been indicated, or where it is indicated that under Division 1, under protected disclosure, that an employee of an organization may make a disclosure of improper conduct to a whistleblowing reporting officer or a whistleblowing report unit where he has reasonable grounds to believe that improper conduct has occurred and is occurring or is likely to occur within the organization, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, this leads me to the very important issue to ask whether this legislation will be subjected to manipulation from the point of view of an employer-employee relationship. And I ask it against the background of the experience that I would have had previously in another place. From the point of view of sometimes, and I am dealing with real issues based on my experience, from the point of view of, I know for a fact that at one particular state entity, I will recollect it very clearly, the Sugarcane Feed Center, that a particular union officer, that is, he was the branch president of the union, and he was suspended on 19 occasions, based on his involvement in the trade union and pursuing issues on behalf of workers. And I am forced to ask the question that if this particular piece of legislation can be abused, it can be manipulated to the point where, for example, in a recognized majority union environment, where an employer has a difference of opinion because of trade union activities, what is happening in terms of pursuing issues on behalf of workers, and in this particular instance, as I said, that a person was subjected to disciplinary action under the Industrial Relations Act for 19 occasions, and every time the union prevailed in representing that particular individual.
In terms of relevance, I don't see the relevance of the situation you're giving to whistleblowing. And I also want to say that I've allowed you some leeway, but a number of members have already spoken about the employer-employee relationship, both with respect to existing employees and former employees under what I would call sour grapes. So I would ask you to go on to your next point, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And in that regard, Madam Speaker, as I said, I want to deal with the very important issue of the relationship in terms of internal disclosures under Clause 11, where an employer shall appoint and keep in his employees such whistleblowing reporting officers as are required for the purposes of this Act.
Standing Order 55(1)B. We traversed this last week. We traversed this today.
Member for Couva South, unless there's something totally different you have to say about the internal mechanism, I would have to uphold the objection in terms of tedious repetition with respect to the internal mechanism. It has been looked at every which way. How you hire the person, whether the person could speak against the employer, all of that. That has been dealt with. So unless it's something very different you're going to see, I will again ask you to move on.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I have listened to you, and I will move on, Madam Speaker. And in this regard, in terms of the very question of what will prevail in the real circumstance, Madam Speaker, I want to go directly to the Hansard of the Honorable Prime Minister, Madam Speaker, when he contributed in this particular debate. And I want to quote where he indicated that, Madam Speaker, and he indicated, we have just spent a long time dealing with trying to bring to a head the whole question of the procurement legislation. And in that legislation, it talks about a procurement officer in every department. Madam Speaker, what we discovered is that some people interpret that to mean that you can go out there and hire a cadre of public servants who will be procurement officers. And he further went on, but the point I want to zero in on, and I quote, we said no, what the law is saying, that you designate some officer as part of their duty. And if it is only you do not have such a person, you can pass that responsibility on to, then you will have to hire somebody. And then he further went on, Madam Speaker, to indicate that in the public service, we are sure in all ministries, we had what you call it, we brought in the permanent secretary, the deputy permanent secretary, and explained to them that in procurement, officers are not that you go out there and hire a set of people. You find somebody within your department who will be designated and identified to do that once in a while within your department. Madam Speaker, I am saying that in relation to dealing with the whole question of whistleblowing and whistleblowing from a reporting point of view, and also from the establishment of a unit within the respective ministries, and from the point of view of the 22 designated authorities, Madam Speaker, I am saying is the Prime Minister telling the country that in order to do this specialist role or fulfill this specialist role and responsibility, you operate in a willy-nilly form or in willy-nilly fashion where you just pluck somebody from a ministry without the necessary competence, without the necessary expertise, without the necessary qualification, and you appoint them to fulfill this role. Madam Speaker, I am saying, based on what the Prime Minister outlined, based on the importance of this particular piece of legislation and what it sets out to do, you simply cannot take a public officer who falls under the Public Service Commission and appoint him without the prerequisite qualifications to fulfill what job description when it has not been clearly spelled out from a reporting unit point of view, Madam Speaker. And that leads me to the very critical issue, Madam Speaker, of the independence of the person who will be chosen by, as in this particular instance, the permanent secretary or the deputy permanent secretary.
Member for Couva South, I'm going to ask you to move on. I've already ruled on that in terms of the whole internal mechanism and the qualifications and so on. Please move on to your next point.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And in this regard, Madam Speaker, I want to deal with a very important issue also too, Madam Speaker, of ensuring that whatever legislation that comes before this Parliament, Madam Speaker, we have a sense of duty and responsibility to ensure that we take control or we display that sense of responsibility from a leadership point of view to ensure that whatever we pass in this particular place can stand up to or it demonstrates what I would call the transparency, integrity, and confidence of the entire process, Madam Speaker. And at the end of the day, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 55(1)B All those issues of transparency have been traversed last week and today.
Member for Couva South?
Yeah.
I'll give you a little leeway to develop that point.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. San Fernando East, I need no guidance from you as it relates to this particular piece of legislation. And, Madam Speaker, as I indicated in relation to the whole issue of the designated authorities and even the whole question of independence from an issue of involving where workers are related to approximately 76,000 companies in Trinidad and Tobago. And from time to time, there will be matters when raised by persons, whether in a recognized union environment or non-recognized union environment, for the purpose of clarification and for consideration also, the Attorney General may want to look at the whole question of including in the designated authorities the Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago as part of the remedial process or the process of redress when persons feel in some way that they have been wrong for becoming involved in the whistleblowing process and so on in the workplace, and they have little or no alternative based on the internal or confidence in the internal procedures point of view, Madam Speaker, and they may want to pursue some kind of grievance via the process that is available to them, and they may feel that the only sense of independence that they can have in terms of redress is at the Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago, or even from the point of view of the Ministry of Labor and Enterprise Development from a conciliation process and so on, Madam Speaker. So I do not know if this may be part of the Attorney General consideration in his winding up to look at the inclusion of the Industrial Court of Trinidad and Tobago from the point of view of part of the designated authorities in the context of this schedule, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, at the end of the day, this resolution, this piece of legislation, is important, but it is important to the government, and it is important in the context of they have continued to sell to the country that it is part of their legislative agenda to deal with the issue of corruption. And as I said, to focus on the issue of the public purse and saving the taxpayers of this country. But at the end of the day, any piece of legislation that comes to this place, we all have a responsibility to ensure that it offers some kind of protection to the small person in the society, the ordinary citizen of this country. And from where I sit, based on what I have read and what I have seen, I am not confident that it will offer that kind of protection and support to workers in the unionized environment and even in the non-unionized environment. And I am of the firm conviction that it can be abused, it can be manipulated to remove persons from within the workplace environment based on collusion between the employer and the reporting officer.
Right back to what I've asked you to move on from. So if you can't find a new point with which to make a contribution, I will also invite you to take a seat.
Well, I was, Madam Speaker, making my final point in the context of the relationship between employer and employee existing in an independent work environment, ensuring that the
Speaker,
rights
Standing
are
Order
protected.
55(1)B, he keeps repeating the same thing.
Member for Couva South, I invite you to make a new point.
Madam Speaker, I indicated that I was simply pointing the government and the Attorney General in a direction of protecting the workers, by extension, the citizens of the country. And I believe also that this piece of legislation should not be placed under the Minister of National Security in the context of what it sets out to achieve on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Member for Point of Peer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm happy to join this debate and act to combat corruption and other wrongdoings by encouraging and facilitating disclosures of improper conduct in the public and private sector, to protect persons making those disclosures from detrimental action, to regulate the receiving, investigating, or otherwise dealing with disclosures of improper conduct, and to provide for other matters connected therewith. Madam Speaker, this bill as a whole proposes laws to allow persons the opportunity to report on corruption and wrongdoing within an organization. The mischief intended is to solve the ongoing corrupt practices in the public and private sectors. And I have nothing wrong with that, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, I want to also look in my presentation the unregulated legislation that I feel this bill is, and it can lead to malicious attacks on innocent individuals, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, throughout this debate, we have, especially on my colleague's side, we have looked at the areas where the bill relates to employees. But I want to look at it from another perspective, because I do not feel that this bill is proportionate to the organizations that employ employees, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when you look at the different clauses, and I want to turn to a few clauses, in that perspective, Madam Speaker, in the interpretation, clause 4, Madam Speaker, when you look at clause K, 4K, otherwise suffering injury, loss or damage in relation to his employment, family life, career, profession, trade or business, Madam Speaker. And this interpretation talks about, and as the Attorney General, when he piloted the bill on the last sitting, talked about employees who should not be subjected to. But in my view, K is such a wide subclause that it really could impact on innocent employers, innocent organizations in relationship to employees who have an grievance or some issue with their employer, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when you look at subsection G, 4G, provided with an adverse reference or refuse a reference. So this is an employee who can take action under the interpretation of detrimental action where he or she feels that she got an adverse reference or none at all, Madam Speaker. And I think it is very harsh, those definitions, and I ask the Attorney General to look at it, because it was looked at in the GSC the first time around. And Madam Speaker, I want to refer to the GSC, because when the Honorable Prime Minister debated, when he debated and the member for Laventille West also, and the member for Point Fortin, I just want to refer something, Madam Speaker, to you. On the 13th November 2015, Minister Dillon, or the Minister of National Security, Edmund Dillon at the time, piloted this bill in his first reading. And after piloting that bill, on the first, I read the first reading, the first time, he took it, and I will quote, Madam Speaker, in accordance, and I quote, with Standing Order 64-1C, I beg to move that the Whistleblower Protection Bill 2015 be referred to a joint select committee to be established for consideration report. That was not our doing. The opposition did not ask for that. The government of the day took it upon themselves to send that 2015 whistleblower bill straight to a GSC, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 55-1B, please. How many times you would say
How is
that?
that? No one said that. Nobody.
What?
No, where?
Ask for a jersey?
Member for Point of Peer, I'll give you a little leeway, but I'll remind you that truncated GSC not completing its work, etc., all of that has been dealt with. So that I give you a little leeway to develop this, but be guided by what has been said already.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm guided. The only point I wanted to make, Madam Speaker, is that the opposition did not ask for this GSC, and the government took it to a GSC, Madam Speaker, on their own accord. Madam Speaker, so when I started off by saying this is an unregulated, in my view, piece of legislation that can have malicious attacks on organizations and employers, Madam Speaker. And whistleblowers, Madam Speaker, can be malicious. I read in the papers, I read in the media on Saturday, Madam Speaker, that they had 7 homes that were invaded by the police.
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 55-1B. God.
Minister of Finance, I just caution you on tolerance. All right, please. Member for Point of Peer, malicious, whistleblowers being malicious has been dealt with from any which way. All right, by several members who've made contributions already. So that I'm not going to allow you to deal with whistleblowers being malicious again. In fact, your first point is really a subset of whistleblowers being potentially malicious. Please move on.
Madam Speaker, I am guided. Can I give you an example of a whistleblower? I'm guided. Yes, she's the leader of the House.
Okay, so let's cut all of the crosstalk. Member for Point of Peer, if you wish, you can continue your contribution. But if you don't wish, I make no judgment on that.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will continue. I will continue, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me carry it to you and the Attorney General to a clause in this bill. Clause 23, Madam Speaker. Clause 20. I don't think anybody dealt with Clause 20 in its entirety.
If you're asking?
I know, I'm just making a...
Several people have. Several people have. Several people have, so that if you're going to deal with Clause 20, please deal with it in a way that hasn't been dealt with before.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Clause 23. Now this, as you rightly know, Madam Speaker, the law is retroactive. 23. In any criminal proceedings, I quote, instituted against a whistleblower, based on the fact that the whistleblower was the perpetrator of, I'm reading, or an accomplice in, improper conduct disclosed by the whistleblower, the court shall, in giving its judgment or decision, take into due account, A, the fact that the disclosure was made by the whistleblower, and B, I'm reading.
Yeah, but everybody read it before you.
No.
Yes. 55-1B, please, Madam Speaker.
Member for Point of Peer, I know it's kind of difficult when a debate runs this long for us to remember everything, but up to today, Clause 20, Subclause 3 was dealt with, including today. Yes. Okay, so please continue. Next point.
Next one. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when this bill was debated in a joint select, and the bill in 2015 went to a joint select, there were some conditions, that the committee had given.
Members, if I don't hear member for point of order, how could I then rule on an objection that somebody may make? Member for point of order, please continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just want to refer you, and I don't think anybody said it. When the Ombudsman, Ms. Lynette Stepson, Senior Counsel, Stevenson, submitted an issue at the to the committee and the GSC, she talked about retroactivity as an ombudsman, right? As an ombudsman. And the committee had given the undertaking to the ombudsman that her concerns would be dealt with in respect of retroactivity, Madam Speaker, in respect of putting a time limit on how far back one goes. And the committee had given the undertaking, and the Attorney General, who was the chair of that committee, had given the undertaking to take that into consideration, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in this bill, 2018 bill, nothing of the sort was brought or adjusted in this bill, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there are so many other different stakeholders who had submitted recommendations. And the chairman of that committee, who is the Attorney General at the time, had said that they would have taken it under advisement to change the bill. None of those recommendations, even by the Law Association in respect to clause 9. Clause 9, Madam Speaker, where it talks about information protected by legal professional privilege. So I'm asking the Attorney General, with this new bill that he talks about, that was part of an old bill, and at a JSC, certain recommendations were raised by different stakeholders, and they were given a commitment that they would make adjustments to it, Madam Speaker. And that is why we have said on this bill that this bill requires to go back into a GSC for better legislation, because this law is not proportional. It is not proportional. It does not protect all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. This law, this bill, Madam Speaker, is a mischief piece of legislation, Madam Speaker. It is not about the whistleblower. It is not about the whistleblower that we talk about in this bill. It is about a mischief that this government wants to perpetrate on this country, Madam Speaker.
48-6, Madam Speaker.
And I uphold the objection. Please withdraw and restate.
I withdraw,
Yes.
Madam Speaker.
Please.
Whatever I said. Yeah, I withdraw whatever I said.
Member,
I withdraw what
okay.
I said.
All right, good. That's sufficient. Please continue.
Madam Speaker, so when we talk about this bill, when the Attorney General piloted this bill is not about protecting whistleblowers, either or. This bill is about putting, I wouldn't want to use the word, my opponent have to help me. It's about putting an unproportionate piece of legislation on the citizens. A disproportionate, sorry, Madam Speaker, right? Because this is a piece of legislation that is a suite of legislation that the Attorney General talked about. And we have seen where he is now putting together his puzzle, Madam Speaker, right? To do what? The citizens have to ask that question, Madam Speaker. Because this bill talks about no report. What happens in this bill, and the Attorney General wind up, should state where do the whistleblowers and their reporting activity go forward? Where does it go? Where does it end up, Madam Speaker? This bill is really, in my view, about clause 23, Madam Speaker. And we will see that play out in this country in the next few weeks, Madam Speaker. Clause 23, if we pass this bill. And I will tell you, Madam Speaker, in closing, Madam Speaker, I cannot support this piece of legislation, Madam Speaker. I thank you.
Member for Superior. I
I thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for allowing me to join this very important debate, which has engaged us over, today will make us in our second day of this debate. And I will not take
Member for Superior, please, I'm on my legs.
I will not be distracted.
I'm on my legs. Member for Laventille West, please. Allow. All right? Member for Superior, continue.
Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for your protection. You know, when the Honourable Prime Minister stood up to speak on this bill on the last occasion, he made a very curious statement. And I really would like to turn that statement, flip it around, as it were. He said that he had a cousin who was afraid of getting married. Why? Because he was afraid that he would be horned, to use the Prime Minister's language. I mean, Madam Speaker, today I say, we do not trust this government. We will not marry and join with them to pass this bill because we know that they will abuse it or have those who will do their bidding. We will not be bullied by them.
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 48-6.
Member for Superior, I'd ask you to withdraw. I know with your experience you can find another way to make that point.
We do not trust this government. We do not trust this government. And therefore, I want to spend the time that I have here in this House to give some of the reasons why we feel this is seriously flawed legislation. Not only is it unconstitutional, but it goes beyond that remit, because you may cure some of that with a three-fifths majority, as the case may be. But it is beyond that. It goes to the 13(1) in the Constitution, which speaks to it must also be reasonably justifiable in a society that has a proper respect for the rights and freedoms of the individual. And we are saying, whilst the Attorney General brought before us some time ago, in 2015, the 2015 bill, and has now indicated that the bill before us, the 2018 bill, is different. The concerns that were raised by the CPC on the 2015 bill remain valid up to today, and I shall demonstrate why. Because you see, the clauses that were impugned by the CPC Ian McIntyre, they remain, with the exception of 3 words, changes of 3 words, they remain identical to what were in the 2015 bill. And therefore, the concerns on constitutionality and being disproportionate to the legitimate aims and so on still hold in the context of the present bill. And I want to share some of these today, Madam Speaker. There was one issue that was not raised by the CPC in considering constitutionality. And that had to do with Clause 7(6). And I really want to raise that today and ask the Attorney General, what is the intention? Because in using 7(6), and if I may read Clause 7(6), Madam, it says, a disclosure made in relation to a member of Parliament shall not amount to a breach of privilege. On its face, a disclosure made in relation to a member of Parliament shall not amount to a breach of privilege. This is identical, Madam Speaker, to a provision that was contained in the 2015 bill. It is the identical provision that we have there. And I will get the clause in the 2015 bill. One moment, please. In the 2015 bill, this was clause 6(5), identical. Now, when the committee met, the Integrity Commission gave submissions on this particular clause. And they said that that clause should include words, any disclosure made, 7(6) now that it is, but in the original, a disclosure made in relation to a member of Parliament shall not amount to a breach. The Integrity Commission in their submissions said that the words should be included after the word made by a member of Parliament. Now, I state this because it's very important to understand what is the purport of this, and I will ask the Honourable Attorney General in his winding up if he would kindly clarify what this actually means. The Integrity Commission said in subsection 5, which was 6(5), and now it's 7(6), we think the words by a member of Parliament needs to be inserted after the word made. On the other hand, in the column for comments, the committee's comments, the committee agreed that this provision would be deleted. The committee agreed that this provision would be deleted. Instead, it is repeated now as clause 7.6 in the 2018 bill. So, again, what the committee agreed or did not agree was it some members, all members, but in the report of the JSC, the interim report, this is the second interim report, it says the committee agreed that this provision would be deleted. So it's still there. When I heard the Honourable Attorney General speak today, last day, in relation to that clause 7.6, I became a bit concerned and a bit confused. And those arguments were repeated by the AG after the Honourable Member Tim Gopi Singh spoke and raised a query about that same 7.6. So if I may take a look at the issue of parliamentary privilege by looking at the Hansard of the Honourable Attorney General at page 13 of the Hansards. So there the Honourable Attorney General explains this in a particular manner. I have it here, MP, at page 13 of the Hansard. I spent a little time on this because no one thus far has really touched on it seriously, but it represents to me a very fundamental departure from the laws of Westminster, from the Lex Parliamenti as we've known it since, well, it's the same, from Lex Parliamenti, from time immemorial, going back to the Magna Carta, all those years ago, that the right to parliamentary freedom of speech has been enshrined. First, it was there, as I say, in the common law, and then it became expressed in the Constitution, our Constitution, in Section 55 of our Republican Constitution. It has been entrenched there. And Madam Speaker, I don't like the word dotish. If they want to use it for themselves, refer to yourself.
Member for Superior. I don't know which member said it, but again, I would like members to be aware of the crosstalk and also on parliamentary language. Member for Superior.
Thank you very much. I refer to page 13 of the Hansard of the Honourable Attorney General, and this is what the Honourable Attorney General had to say. 30. This is with reference to clause 7.6, talking about privileges parliamentarian. Now, why? AG asks why. Because the law is designed to protect you when you're known from detrimental action, and that is a critical point inside of here. It also makes sure to treat with an important observation raised by member Ramadan in the committee, which is where we treat with parliamentary privilege, and we have especially carved out the manner in which we treat with Section 55 of the Constitution, which is the absolute privilege of Parliament in the context set out. And then the Honourable Member shifted to Clause 8 and then comes back and says as follows. This includes, for instance, a matter which is now ended, the Dansam Dansu kind of matter, where a fraudulent statement was engrossed into an affidavit and brought to a parliament, laid on table, and resulted in something which happened in the courts and which then fell apart after due process. That kind of distinction, that kind of perjury will not find itself in this place. These sentiments were expressed by the Honourable Member for Laventille, the Honourable Fitzgerald Hines today. Similar sentiments expressed about if you come here with a statement and you make a disclosure in the Parliament that this particular clause, he didn't give the right clause, he said clause 9. Clause 9 deals with legal professional privilege. It is indeed clause 7.6, which talks about parliamentary privilege, madam. So I really need for us to clarify, is it what it says on the face of clause 7.6, or is it this explanation that has been given that when a member stands in the Parliament and makes a disclosure, that member will now no longer be subject to parliamentary privilege? This is what, I repeat what the Honourable Attorney General said. This includes, for instance, a matter which is now ended, the Dansam Dansu kind of matter, where a fraudulent statement was grossed into an affidavit, brought to a parliament. Yes, I got it from Whistleblower, and I read it in the parliament, and I had a parliamentary privilege at that time. The AG is now saying it resulted in something which happened in the courts, which then fell apart after due process. That kind of distinction, that kind of perjury will not find itself in this place. How is it not going to find itself here? How is it not going to find itself here? Honourable AG will probably explain it, because you see, I have very serious concerns, Madam Speaker. We have a parliamentary democracy. We have a parliamentary democracy. And enshrined in our Constitution, in Section 55, is that parliamentary privilege, freedom of speech. I've said this goes back to hundreds of years, and maybe right back to the Magna Carta, that when a parliamentarian speaks, you have the right of parliamentary privilege, so that you can raise issues on behalf of your constituents. Will they stop grumbling? They have a chance to reply. You have a chance to reply. So that goes back, I'm saying. That privilege goes back. And then we came and we enshrined it in our Constitution. So first of all, the committee saw wisdom in deleting it. It was not deleted. It reappears in Clause 7.6. Secondly, when asked here in this House by, I think it was MP Tim Gopi Singh, Honourable Attorney, you're a very brilliant man. Some of us may not agree, but Tim Gopi Singh did say that. You speak well. You're very learned. I would really love you to tell us what this really means. And he read the clause. A disclosure made by a member of parliament would not amount to a breach of privilege. I could sit down if you want to give the answer, or if you want to wind up. AG replies, thank you, honourable member. The concern, I would not take the opportunity to wind up, was how the law would articulate against Section 55 of the Constitution, which provides the immunity from privilege for parliamentary members. And what was requested here was consideration come from Mr. Ramadar, member for St. Augustine, that we ought to make sure that if Parliament wanted to give a disclosure under this, a member of Parliament giving a disclosure would not breach the rule of privilege if that was done. It was taken from the English precedent of similar value. So this appears to be contradicting the example given both by the AG and by the member MP, Honourable MP Hines, about a particular incident of a disclosure made here, and I'm saying that will not be, could not happen here again. Madam Speaker, whilst it is, if you breach Section 4 and 5 rights of the Constitution, your rights, your fundamental rights, privacy, no deprivation of property, and so on, the law allows, the Constitution allows for that to be done with a 3/5 majority. This bill does say it has a 3/5 majority, but you see, if you go by a side wind to imply an amendment to Section 55 of the Constitution, then that is so deeply entrenched. What is needed is a 3/4 majority of the Parliament, not a 3/5. So I await the AG's explanation as to why that example was given and how does it tie in with Section 55 rights. And I will read Section 54 of our Constitution. 54 tells us that if you are in any way a bill for an act relating to Section 55 and others shall not be passed unless the final vote is supported in the House by the votes of not 3/4 of all members of the House, in the Senate 2/3. So it's a much greater level of entrenchment in the Constitution. And then we come to Section 55, which gives us the privileges and immunities of Parliament, which is deeply entrenched. And then we talk about 54, and we talk about altering. So you may bring a bill that directly says, I'm going to alter Section 55 of the Constitution, or you might be implication, as this is doing, you may by implication be altering the Constitution, and doing so, as I say, without the constitutional remit, or indeed without the due respect, the proportionality that is required. I raise that issue, Madam, and I move on, and I'll await the clarification, because it will be important if this thing should come to a courthouse. It is important that the Hansard may be able to assist in the interpretation, because we have two different versions of what this particular clause means. I move along, Madam, to some other issues with respect to our debate here today. Now, you know, I also heard all the nice things about whistleblowing, and yes, we agree about whistleblower legislation and so on. But we have just had a prime example of whistleblowing gone bad or gone mad. And I will not repeat it, but we saw where information was given, which would have been from a whistleblower, and heavily armed contingent police officers descended on not one home, 7 homes, and I'm told they were told to look for a particular color house. I'm told they were look for a yellow house. So they went to every yellow house that they could find.
Standing Order 48-1, please. How many times will you repeat it?
Members, I will rise on Standing Order 55-1B. Member for Siparia, that matter was raised on about 2 occasions already for this afternoon. Please proceed with the other
Guided,
point.
madam. I'm guided. And then, madam, we have the other flip side of it, where it is that we are talking about protecting whistleblowers and helping with whistleblowers so that we can get to the root of corruption and so on. And yet, when we have not just whistleblowing, we have trumpets blaring. Nothing has been done whatsoever to deal with those trumpets. The Honourable Prime Minister came to his house and spoke about a letter sent, a whistleblower's letter being sent to then Prime Minister, speaking to my good self, from the Solicitor General, and saying that the very person who was impugned in that letter.
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 55-1B, that was dealt with by other members.
No.
Yes, it was.
Member for Siparia, I will allow you.
Thank you, madam. No one has said it. No one, Hollywood. Yes. Yes, no one dealt with it yet, madam. Because you see, whilst people accuse others of mischief and confusion, it is exactly what they engaged in statements they made. And so the Honourable Prime Minister, in his contribution, told this House, and by extension, the nation, that this matter came, and it's at page 8 of the Hansard, page 8 of this, from the last sitting on this bill. There we are. I quote from the Hansard, with your leave, madam. He talks about whistleblowing, I quote from the Honourable Prime Minister, and the shortcomings of the appointment. I want to remind my colleague from Oakbridge East on this question of appointment of whistleblower. There was a Solicitor General called Donaldson Honeywell, who wrote complaints to a Prime Minister, serious complaints about misconduct in a serious government department, criminal conduct, and the Prime Minister sent it to the Attorney General to deal with it. That was a whistleblower, and the AG was the subject of a complaint, and that is how she dealt with it. Nothing is further from the truth, Madam Speaker. Nothing is further from the truth. I have here with me the correspondence.
Please, everybody who wishes to speak will have an opportunity. I would like to hear the member for Siparia. Member for Siparia, please.
Thank you, madam. Madam Speaker, the first point is that the Prime Minister sent it to the Attorney General. That is true. But the Attorney General was not the subject of the complaint in the letter. I quote here from The Guardian of Tuesday, April 29, 2014. Attorney General Anna Ramlogan has called on former Solicitor General Eleanor Donaldson Honeywell to clarify whether she sent an October 20, 2013 letter to Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar on the prison litigation issue, as she had advised him that it was sent and had been forwarded a signed copy to his office. The AG made the call in a statement last night after Donaldson Honeywell yesterday issued a press release on the letter she wrote to the PM in August 2013, seeking an investigation of her claims involving attorneys in prison litigation cases and an apparent subsequent amendment to this. In her statement yesterday, which seemed to be spurred by continuing rage and public debate over the matter, Donaldson Honeywell said, at no time did she withdraw her call for a probe in the matter. She confirmed she did draft a letter headed confidential and without prejudice on the issue. But she said she was no longer in a position to have records checked to determine whether it was sent. the Honourable Lady had by then resigned. Questions about the issue have arisen after an August 30th letter by Donaldson Honeywell to the Prime Minister emerged in the media recently. In that first letter, Donaldson Honeywell requested a probe into attorneys involved in litigation against the state. And then, Madam Speaker, in that same newspaper article, Donaldson Honeywell, the goodly lady, who was appointed as Solicitor General in 2010, the post was vacant for 4 years, resigned from the AG's office November 12, 2013. When Donaldson Honeywell had resigned, she told the TNT Guardian she resigned for personal reasons and that she did not make any report of alleged corruption in her resignation letter. She had said then that she and the AG were on cordial terms and she had found to be a person she did not have a problem with. This is one part of the newspaper article. And in reports in the newspaper on that very said day, Madam Donaldson Honeywell indicated that she, as far as she was concerned, the matter had been sent to the AG. The AG was to work together with the Commissioner of Police, the DPP, and other officials, and that's as far as she was concerned, the matter had been dealt with. All these I'll put into the public domain in good time. I don't want to spend all my time on this mischief and confusion narrative that is coming forth. So here we are then on whistleblowing. And there's another matter I would like to raise when it comes to this issue of retroactive legislation. Now, retroactive legislation, which is in clause 5, I believe, here saying that this deals with matters before they come into force of the act and so on. It is really repugnant to the law as we know it. However, there are circumstances when you can have retrospective legislation. The problem is when you have retrospective legislation that now makes unlawful something that was not unlawful at the time when it happened. In other words, you're going ex post facto to make something which at the time when it was done or being done was not unlawful, but then a subsequent law now says, hey, this thing is unlawful. And I'll give some examples here, and it is tied in fact, with CPC McIntyre's opinion, which those clauses are repeated. And what was said there is that when we look at the range of wrongdoings contemplated by the bill, which is set out in the definition of improper conduct, in the definition section, what it does, it goes beyond the commission of criminal offenses and breaches of the law. And they now include, for example, and I'm reading from the definition of the word improper conduct, for example, conduct that is likely to result in a miscarriage of justice, conduct that is likely to threaten the health or safety of a person, conduct that is likely to threaten or damage the environment, conduct that tends to show unfair discrimination, willful concealment of any act described in paragraph A to H. This is included in the definition. The CPC tells us, and they repeat it in the present bill, tells us that these do not relate to the commission of a criminal offense or a breach of the law. So if it is now ex post facto, suppose one of those things that happened prior to the coming into force of this act would not have been a breach of the law, but today, from the time this goes into effect and is proclaimed, it has now become improper conduct, actionable in the way under this law. That, to me, is totally against any tenet of our jurisprudence that deals with retroactive legislation. The AG cited a case he calls the locus classicus, Lianagi and the Queen. I think he said Lianagi and the AG, but I think it was Lianagi and the Queen. Privy Council decision, which just says exactly the same thing. In that case, ex post facto, after some kind of a coup had taken place in Ceylon, that government passed law to keep people in jail for 60 days, but backwards. They had kept them for 60 days, and they came to make legal that which had been not legal previously. And several things they had done in that new legislation after the fact, And so in that retroactive law, the Privy Council held, look, you have to strike it down, because what you're doing now, things that may not have been unlawful then, you're now making them lawful after the fact. And we see in this definition of improper conduct that there are indeed some provisions that would not have been considered improper conduct until this law comes into effect. I move on, Madam Speaker. I'm reading the newspaper today. This is the online version. This is the Express, a woman who helped solve a murder, hunted down and killed. Today's Express, during the day, the online version. Woman who helped solve a murder, hunted down and killed. So I will ask again through you, in addition to these legal kinds of protection, what kind of physical protection will be given to whistleblowers? What kind of physical protection? A 32-year-old woman shot and killed on Sunday night in Barataria. The police were told at about 7:30 p.m. Franco was standing in her family's yard and so on. Gunmen shot her down and so on. And there's several cases, like last week, there's another one of a gentleman, another one, story.
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 55-1B, please. Again, all this has been traversed today.
Member for Superior, I'll allow you to continue.
I thank you, madam. I'm saying just last week I read of another case of a man witnessed a murder again, a witness. I know the issue has been raised about witness protection, yes, St. Joseph, but again I'm asking the AG, please, because we are seeing more of it happening, even as we're telling people, stick your neck out, blow your whistle. What is the physical protection? There is nothing contained in this law with respect to that. We know there's a witness protection program. How is that going to be beefed up to help these people? And I go back again now to whether this law is proportional or disproportional, and to whether we satisfy 13(1) of the Constitution that it is reasonably justifiable in a society with a respect for the rights and freedoms of others. The CPC had told us that several things were not constitutional, and I know we were shut down, members were shut down from reading his opinion because we are told it's another bill. Madam, I want to just raise again and to show that the clause is identical, and therefore the concerns raised by the CPC are still germane and very relevant to the issues of constitutionality. The CPC told us, A, the long title, I'm saying 2015, and I'm reading and just inserting what is the current provision in the 2018 bill. The long title is identical to the 2018 bill before us. The definition of improper conduct in Clause 3 is identical to the definition now contained in Clause 4. Clauses 6.1 and 2 identical to the now 7.1 and 2. Clause 9.2 identical to now 10.2. 10.2 from the old one identical to 11.2. 12.3 identical to now 13.3. 13.2 then identical to now 14.2. 51 from then identical to 16.1, except we've now added a few words with the consent of the whistleblower. And I'll return to that point, madam. And what the CPC told us is all these clauses, which have been reproduced in the 2018 bill, when read together, permit the disclosure, collection, processing, and sharing of personal or confidential information of a person without his knowledge or consent. And this is where we get into the breaches of privacy rights and so on. Clause 4, CPC tells us, of that 15 bill is now the same, identical to Clause 5 of our 2018 bill, which permits a disclosure to be made in respect of improper conduct coming into force of the proposed act dealing with retroactive legislation. I've already raised that issue. CPC talks about clauses 6 to 6, which 6.6, that has been removed, but clauses 16, now 18, clause 25, now clause 27, these make contractual provisions voidable, unenforceable, and void. And finally, clause 16, which is now our 18, and 17.1, which is our 19.1, they limit the right of a person to initiate civil or disciplinary proceedings. This is a severe indictment on this bill. You are depriving a citizen of his fundamental right enshrined in the Constitution to go to a court of law to initiate civil proceedings. You're saying no such proceedings can now be initiated, and you look to 19.1 of our present bill, I need to read it, which is a breach of protection of the law. And your right to access a court of law, that is the tenet, that is a cornerstone of any democracy, Madam Speaker.
Member for Superior, your original 30 minutes are now spent, entitled 15 more minutes. I just want to remind members of the front branch, Member for Superior has a pretty fine voice, so it's difficult with the constant talking to hear her.
I thought that.
Please continue.
Thank you for the compliment, Madam, of having a very fine voice. Thank you for that compliment. Madam, I'm saying it is a cornerstone. You know, a democracy, the cornerstone of a democracy is the right of the individual's access to a court of law for the determination of your rights and so on. Before that happened, or where the justice system doesn't really operate, what you have is a strongman tactics. What you have is the law of the jungle, the strongest and the fittest survive. What really distinguishes a civilized and modern society from the law of the jungle is, in fact, that right of access to the court to determine your rights and freedoms. And so we come to 19.1 here. Notwithstanding any other law, a whistleblower who makes a protected disclosure is not liable to any criminal, civil, or disciplinary proceedings for having made such a disclosure. Not subject to any criminal or civil proceedings. Madam, you cannot take away the right of an individual to go to court to have their rights determined. A whistleblower does something that is contrary against your rights. You cannot take away that right. And this is what CPC McIntyre, you know, they could frown and scream and twist their faces. This is the view and opinion of CPC Ian McIntyre. I am just transposing it into the new provision, into the new clause number of the identical clause 20. And I'll read it. So 19.1 has now become 17.1 in the bill. 2015, 17.1, identical to what is now 19.1, which I just read. 17.1, which is what Ian McIntyre spoke about and wrote his opinion about, is identical to this clause I have just read, where you seek to deprive a person of their rights to access the court and to a civil or criminal court. So let me quote from Senior Counsel, Chief Parliamentary Counsel, Ian McIntyre. 19.1 is now 17.1. Yeah. 17.1. So with respect to clause 17.1, Senior Counsel McIntyre told us, in his opinion, retroactive. One moment, please, madam. Yes. And I read from that opinion of the CPC, which dealt with clauses 16 and 17.1 of the old bill, and I've now indicated that these now relate to the present 19.1. 19.1 here, Madam Speaker. Identical. Clause 16 is now clause 18, identical. And 17.1 that CPC McIntyre spoke about is now identical to 19.1. And this is what the Senior Counsel CPC had to say. The final issue for consideration is whether clauses 16 and 71, now I'm saying reproduced in the new bill, as discussed, infringe the right to protection of the law by removing the rights of persons to initiate proceedings in court. Essentially, the issue is whether limited access of persons aggrieved by the actions of a whistleblower to judicial proceedings or administrative remedies is a breach of sections 5(2)(e) and H of the Constitution. I continue quoting. Section 5(2)(e) and H of the Constitution states as follows. 2. Without prejudice to subsection 1, but subject to this chapter and to section 54, Parliament may not, that is us here and the other house, Parliament may not deprive a person of the right to a fair hearing in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice for the determination of his rights and obligations. Further, H, Parliament may not deprive a person of the right to such procedural provisions as are necessary for the purpose of giving effect and protection to the aforesaid rights and freedoms. I continue from CPC McIntyre. The Constitution therefore provides that every person has the right to have a dispute that can be resolved by the application of law, decided in a fair public hearing before a court, or where appropriate, another independent and impartial tribunal or forum. It is submitted that both these clauses abridge sections 5, 2, and E and H of the Constitution. Detrimental action is defined in the earlier interpretation clause to include subjecting the person to disciplinary action. Clause 16, therefore, prevents an employer from initiating disciplinary action against an employee who, in making a protected disclosure, breaches a duty of confidentiality owed by him to his employer under his contract of employment. Similarly, Clause 7 deprives the employer of access to criminal, civil, and disciplinary remedies for such a breach. These clauses are therefore unconstitutional. And even if they were passed with a special majority, it may fail the test of being reasonably justified in a democratic society. Because why? And this is what the CPC said. Because it tolerates the commission of criminal offenses for the purposes of making a protected disclosure. So you're saying that whistleblower guy, I'm protecting you so well. You could commit a criminal offense. You could hack into a man's computer. You could break down into his door. You're tolerating a criminal offense for the purposes of making a protected disclosure. These are not my words, Madam Speaker. All the grumbling there will not change the words of CPC Ian McIntyre in his opinion given to the Joint Select Committee. I have indicated, through you, Madam, which bill? Both bills. The provisions I have listed in the 2015 bill are identical to the provisions found in the 2018 bill. So you're not getting away with that. They're identical. I listed that at the start. I showed how each one was identical. Come and tell me it's not different. The only difference I saw is in a clause which says that you will now add the words in 15.1, which is now 16.1, to add the words with the consent of the whistleblower, with the consent of the whistleblower. Madam, the issue raised by CPC McIntyre was not that you can disclose. Let me read it close, I think it'll make more sense for 16.1. It's not the consent of the whistleblower, you know. It's not a gathering and analyzing and collating and sharing the information of an individual with the consent of the whistleblower, you know. That's what you don't want us to say. You could do all of that. But guess what? We slip in a little clause here because you want to use it with consent. It is the consent of the persons whose individual, private, confidential data is being shared, is being collated, is being run all over the place. So in this bill, the 18 bill, all that has happened for that clause, 16.1, is to add the words with the consent of the whistleblower. It appears to me a complete misunderstanding of what CPC McIntyre had said, that if you're going to use people's private and personal confidential data, you should have the consent of the person, not the consent of the whistleblower. Whose rights are being damaged and affected? Not the whistleblower. It is the persons whose data and information is being shared. And now, another very serious matter here, which has to do, and again CPC dealt with it, which has to making contractual provisions voidable, unenforceable, and void. And these are to be found, was then in clause 16, now clause 18, and then in clause 25, identical now to 27. So it's the same clause that was impugned by CPC McIntyre. 18 and now 27. And let's read 18, what it does. It reaches all your contractual arrangements. 18 says, subject to exceptions provided for in this Act, despite any prohibition or any restriction on disclosure of information under any written law, rule of law, contract, oath or practice, a whistleblower shall not be subjected to detrimental action on account of having made a protected disclosure, in spite of any provision, in spite of any law, in spite of any contract. Go ahead, it's okay. You're saying none of that matters. The whistleblower trumps everything as a contract, a provision in another law. Central Bank Act has confidentiality provisions. A lot of laws have these confidentiality provisions. What's going to happen? You are now taking, with one swoop, forget everything in the law, in the framework of law. Just forget it, whistleblower, come forth. Come forth. That's what they're saying. Oh, ye, you have something to tell. Come forth, come forth. Come forth, break the law, commit a criminal offense. We are going to give you immunity. We are going to give you the immunity. You're not going to be able to be subject to any disciplinary, civil, or criminal questions on your behavior. How can that be right in a society that has a proper respect for the rights and freedoms of the individual? How can that be right, Madam Speaker? I ask of you. And so that was I read for you was what was 16 or 18. And then 25, now it is 27. So they were just shifted around. They were not removed, you know. The only change that this bill has of any substance, it now includes a clause which says this act is inconsistent with the Constitution. And having made that change, the numbers of the clauses shifted accordingly, but the clauses remain. So here's what 27 says. Clause 27. Similar, in a similar vein, 27. Any provision in a contract of service, so you're trumping any contractual arrangements between a company and another, employer, employee, trump it, wipe it out, in other words. Any provision in a contract of service or other agreement between an employer and an employee is void, insofar as it purports to exclude any provision of this act, including an agreement to refrain from instituting or continuing any proceedings under this act, or insofar as it purports to preclude the employee or has the effect of discouraging the employee from making a protective disclosure. Any provision in a contract, madam? There's a case in our Western law reports, I believe is IRC and Lilliman, which talks about what is property. And contractual agreements are seen as property. The terms in the contract, in that case, IRC and Lilliman reported in the Western reports, which tells us money is property, yes? And contractual obligations, that is also property. And if through this law, these two sections I've read, you are now going to void contractual terms, then again, you're being deprived of your right to property without due process, Madam Speaker, in breach of the Constitution. So you're making contractual provisions voidable, unenforceable, and void under these provisions 18 and 27. Thank you. Thank you. Madam, as I close, I heard a very strange kind of convoluted logic coming from a member. And it's not the first time I've heard it from a member opposite. Talking about projects, I think that's when the MP for Oropouche West was objecting under 48-1 when another MP from the other side was speaking. And it was about savings. We save so much money on the road to Valencia. We save so money on the Curep interchange. We save money. It's the first time I hear people save money when no money was spent whatsoever. How can you have savings? How are you going to save if no work was spent, no money was spent? How can you save? The only time you can save, and you sure, well, that's it, you know, you really, is a do-nothing government. Blame everybody in the world. Say we're afraid your whistleblowing thing. Well, yes. Yes, the people of this country are afraid of you. We do not trust you, and we will act accordingly. I thank you very much.
Chancellors.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just to remind the public of Trinidad and Tobago what it is that we're currently debating in the House here today, lest they forget as a result of all of the misrepresentation of fact that has taken place over the past few hours. We're debating an act to combat corruption, an act to combat corruption and other wrongdoings by encouraging and facilitating disclosures of improper conduct in the public and private sector to protect persons making those disclosures from...
Thank you, member. Please proceed.
Madam Speaker, as I said, this debate here today is a debate that goes to the heart of corruption.
That's right. That's right.
This debate here, Madam Speaker, today is a debate that has all of those who may have engaged in acts of corruption in the country quite nervous. This debate, Madam Speaker, is to go directly against the scourge, the disease of corruption, a disease that affects the whole of society. Madam Speaker, respectfully, when money is misappropriated, when money is stolen, when the treasury is abused and monies are misappropriated, it means less for the children, less for education, less for sports, less for hospitals, less for travel and infrastructure, less for the police service, less for teachers, less for doctors, nurses, sanitation workers, and unfortunately, less for the young children who will have less opportunity as a result of the misappropriation of money from the treasury of Trinidad and Tobago. And this bill here today, Madam Speaker, that we're debating is an important and crucial pillar in any country's fight against corruption, and in particular, corrupt acts of misappropriation of taxpayers' money. You see, Madam Speaker, from day one, this administration has told the public, even before becoming the administration, that the corruption that was committed previously would be something that eyes would be focused on. This administration had said prior to coming into office
Speaker,
that what we would be,
please,
what we would be focusing on.
Every speaker.
Member, I'll allow you some leeway.
Thank you very much. I understand why the word corruption, has a certain effect on certain people in this House. Madam Speaker, whistleblowing is one of the most critical pillars in a fight against corruption. You see, Madam Speaker, when corrupt acts have taken place, they usually involve more than one person. There are normally fingerprints left, there may be footprints left, but there are always persons who have assisted or are aware of corrupt acts being committed. And in order to fight corruption and turn information to turn old talk, intelligence even, into evidence for prosecution of corruption, you have to provide safe avenues for persons who want to speak the truth, persons who want to speak to the authorities and to tell them what has taken place. Madam Speaker, there's a terminology called dog whistling, and I'm sure that the public is aware of the concept of dog whistling. And dog whistling is when people blow a silent whistle, silent to certain ears, but those that they want to hear the whistle will hear it and react. It disheartens me as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago and as an elected member, one of 41, to have sat in this House on 2 occasions, on the last occasion, and through the whole of today from 1:30 this afternoon or from 2:30 when the debate began or thereabouts, to hear every single member of the opposition who contributed, every single one of them, blow a dog whistle, that any whistleblower that come forward, be careful about your safety and your health. I sat here and I wondered, and the leader of the opposition is saying it out aloud again. Is it a warning that is being sent by the opposition that any person who wants to come forward under this bill, any snitch as they put it, anybody who has evidence of corruption that was committed, be careful. And look, Oropuch East. Are these threats, Madam Speaker? Is this the dog whistle effect that is taking place? I put the country on notice because every single member of the opposition blew the dog whistle here today.
Member, please continue.
Madam Speaker, is the message, the clear message, the clear mantra being portrayed and protracted by the opposition today, Madam Speaker, is it a warning to those who want to do what is right for the country and come forward and give evidence of wrongdoing? Don't do it because something may happen that they know about. So I'd like to correct it immediately on the record. Madam Speaker, as we stand here today in this debate, and the leader of the opposition, the member for Siparia, referred to an Express article about a young woman who lost her life in Barataria last night, and the claim that she was under witness protection. I correct the record here today. Not a single person who is under the witness protection of Trinidad and Tobago from its inception to now, not a single life has been lost. So all of the dog whistling in the world about witness protection that is constantly put forward by those on the other side is completely misplaced. So any whistleblower who wants to come forward in Trinidad and Tobago and give evidence, and they can be subjected to the witness protection program of Trinidad and Tobago. To date, there is a 100% record of every witness being kept alive and being kept safe. So there is that safe haven. Of course, the witness protection program, Mr. Deputy Speaker, contains sometimes very onerous terms for you to be maintained in a safe environment. And next, I've listened for 2 days now of debate, and it's as though whistleblowing policies and procedures are something new, something novel, something that is abnormal, something ground and earth-shattering. But I'd like to tell the public of Trinidad and Tobago, as they probably already know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, many corporate entities in Trinidad and Tobago have whistleblowing policies and procedures. Massey, Sagicor, BP and other oil and gas multinationals, Angostura, Atlantic LNG, in the financial institutions, FCB, Unit Trust, WASA, Republic Bank, all of these private entities have whistleblowing procedures and policies. Many of them actually hire independent suppliers that the whistleblowers can go to outside of the institutions, outside of the country. In fact, as the member for San Fernando West reminds me, prior to me being the representative for Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West, I was on the panel for oil and gas multinationals in whistleblower programs, that when someone in the program wanted to blow the whistle internally, I sat on the panel to investigate and determine those whistleblowing occasions. So I assure the public of Trinidad and Tobago, there is absolutely nothing to fear with this bill and with this proposition and this act here today. In fact, the only people that are going to be fearful of this type of legislation here today are those who have in fact committed the ills and the wrongs and have engaged in corrupt action. And I say that without fear of contradiction, despite all of the Cambridge Analytica type of mantras we've heard, all of the fear-mongering that we've heard taking place here today. Mr. Deputy Speaker, if you would now allow me to deal with some of the misinformation that is being put forward over the period since the first debate all the way to today, even from what I've seen reported in the newspapers over the weekend, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The first one, which is the most ridiculous of propositions, that I see the newspaper, the Express newspaper today reporting that the honourable member, and she's actually reading the newspapers there, so if she turns to page 3 of the Express newspaper, the honourable member for Siparia said at a function on Saturday in the attempt to fearmonger amongst the population. The proposition was that anyone who has any form of employment or employs anyone, so if you only have 2 employees, you have to set up a whistleblowing unit. And this type of proposition, that no matter how many employees you have the responsibility to set up a whistleblowing unit. Complete false, misinformation being spewed by none other than the leader of the opposition, senior counsel, former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, to the public of Trinidad and Tobago. It is very clear in the proposed bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we are saying that there are designated authorities that will have the responsibility to set up whistleblowing units for exactly those types of situations. for the people who only employ 1 or 2 persons, for anybody in Trinidad and Tobago, anybody in Trinidad and Tobago, and you don't even have to be a national of Trinidad and Tobago to go forward to one of these designated authorities and to give the whistleblowing evidence, the information. And these designated authorities now have the responsibility to investigate the allegations that have been raised. So I'd like to dismiss and dispense immediately this falsehood, this misinformation being given by the opposition, that everybody has to set up a whistleblowing unit in their organization. That is completely untrue, inaccurate, false, and is misleading. The fear-mongering that we've heard taking place throughout the course of last week, over the weekend, into today's debate, the continued attempts, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by the opposition to frighten the population about anti-corruption legislation. And I say again that if you have not engaged in wrongdoing, you have nothing to be afraid of. And I turn immediately to Section 23, Clause 23(1)(e). Mr. Deputy Speaker, they have been pushing a story, a narrative, that anyone can go and make up a story on someone else and put them through a whole whistleblowing operation. They can go and give false evidence to the authorities, and then you'll be susceptible to the law. I'd like the public to know that that is provided for in this legislation. Clause 23(1) says, a person commits an offense, Mr. Deputy Speaker, if he purports to make a disclosure under this act, knowing that it contains a statement that is false or misleading, or being reckless as to whether the statement is false or misleading. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the provision that I've just read says in the clearest possible terms that if anyone gives false or misleading information under the whistleblowing legislation, they are susceptible to being charged and found guilty of a criminal offense. So the law provides to make sure that anyone who decides to engage in providing false information will be susceptible to a criminal charge. So again, complete falsehood, complete misinformation in the fear-mongering attitude of those on the other side. Another one is the continued calling, Mr. Deputy Speaker, of harm to whistleblowers by the opposition is to be condemned. We on this side condemn the continued calls. Every single speaker on that side, Mr. Deputy Speaker, every single...
Mr. Deputy Speaker, 48-6.
Overruled. Proceed.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the truth is the public would have seen the debate. The public would have noted that every single speaker of the opposition made the call about the harm that will come to anyone who blows a whistle. And they cannot deny it as they on the Hansard. We condemn that type of behavior. The attitude of this country, Mr. Deputy Speaker, cannot be, don't pass law, don't do anything to fight corruption because of the potential harm that can come to witnesses. The attitude that is being espoused is don't do anything to disrupt
Mr. Deputy
status
Speaker,
quo.
48-6. No one on this side has ascribed harm to whistleblowers.
But they
you must withdraw that.
Throughout.
Overruled.
I wouldn't even worry to respond.
Every single one of you all said that. I was awake, you know.
It was amazing as well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with the greatest of respect. In fact,
As the Speaker and the Chair, I have ruled based on the standing order that the member has identified. Kindly proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, my colleague from Chaguanas West spent almost the whole of his contribution focused on the whole procedure of how this left the Joint Select Committee, and then why wasn't it the Joint Select Committee allowed to complete its work, and why was this bill brought back to the Parliament. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a continual submission, again, by those on the other side and by the opposition. And again, I'd like to tell the public of Trinidad and Tobago, through you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is in fact a weak submission. As
Mr. Deputy Speaker, 55(1)B, please. We have dealt with the issue of the Joint Select Committee. 55(1)B.
Member, now that the proper standing order has been invoked, I would like you to tie in your point quickly and move on.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, with the greatest of respect, this is me responding to what they have said. There has only been.
Member, please. Members, Honorable Member, I have so ruled. Again, tie in the point, and then you can proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the point is this. The bill has to go to a full committee of the House, in the full glare of the public, in live proceedings of Parliament. Everybody has the opportunity at that stage, not only a few select members of our Joint Select Committee, 41 members of the House will have the opportunity in full committee of Parliament to go through on a clause-by-clause basis and to make any suggestions they want to amendments. And I will say at this stage, for the public, Mr. Deputy Speaker, not a single proposed amendment has been made by any member of the opposition as at this stage. When we go to full committee, any amendments they want to make, they talk about they will support good law. It is open at the full committee stage for them.
Member for Siparia, please. I will give you certain leave, but again, it's continuous. Right? Please let the member finish his discourse.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, with the greatest of respect, it is the public of Trinidad and Tobago who will judge what goes on in the House. They will look very carefully at the behavior. They will listen very carefully to the dog whistling and ignore it. So the point that I'm making, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is for them to say, for the suggestion to be made that we should not proceed with the bill because it came out of Joint Select Committee, is a complete non-starter. Let us deal with it in full committee. Furthermore, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what I'd like to say is that a lot of the submissions being made, and I'll come to it in a short while, in particular with the CPC's contribution, the CPC's advice, was with respect to a bill that was initially laid in 2015. I now deal with the point of retroactivity. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the submission was being made again by the member for Siparia with respect to retroactivity. Mr. Deputy Speaker, and the suggestion that this bill is now creating offenses that if passed or when passed would mean that persons now can be charged with something done in the past. Again, completely inaccurate. This bill is about whistleblowing. This bill is about providing procedures to protect persons who want to come forward with evidence. The evidence would be of crimes and offenses already committed in the past. Crimes and offenses that when committed, at the time they were committed, were already crimes and offenses. So the whole dispute, the whole debate with respect to retroactivity does not arise here, with the greatest of respect, Mr. Deputy Speaker. That is if we are creating a new offense today for something that you did in the past that you now stand to be captured for, and the time when you did it in the past, it was not an offense. That does not apply here. The retroactivity is the protection for the whistleblower who comes forward with the evidence now of a crime and offense that was committed, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the past. So it is a blanket of protection. You can come freely. The member for Siparia and others saying, come here, and bring all the evidence. Yes, do that. Do what is right for Trinidad and Tobago. Come forward and give us the evidence of the wrongdoing that took place in the past and the offenses that were committed in the past, the kickbacks that took place in the past, and all of the other acts against the Treasury that took place in the past, the overpricing, the inflation of the lands that took place in the past.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, 55(1)B, please. We have been through this with several speakers on government side.
Nobody said that.
Nobody.
55(1), please.
Again, as the speaker mentioned, he is responding to based on what your last speaker said, the member for Siparia. Proceed. Overruled.
Thank you very much. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Princess Town could come forward.
Member, no. I have ruled. Proceed. I have ruled.
I am contributing. Princess Town could come forward and give evidence, you know. You could come and tell us what was going on.
Please do not draw me into the debate.
Protection. You have protection. Come and tell us what was happening.
48-6. Why don't tell us about your stepdaughter and all the drugs?
Want to tell us what was happening.
Why don't tell us about that one?
Tell us.
Tell us. Tell us about that one.
Tim out. Getting personal, boy.
That's what I want to hear about.
Members, again, I have ruled, and member for Princess Town, I have ruled. I would like you to retract every statement that you just make.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I retract, but also I raise on standing order.
No, hold on. One at a time. I would like you to retract your statement.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I retract the statement.
You have something else to say, member?
Yeah, Mr. Deputy Speaker, 48-6, the honourable member is imputing improper motives by calling on me to become a whistleblower. I am in no way involved in this debate.
Okay, member, I will so rule. And again, member, based on the standing order, I would like to move on to your point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the truth is in the whistleblowing world, the persons who are wrong the acts, who are wrong the corrupt acts that were being committed, are the ones who would come forward. The ones who are carrying the bags, the ones who are carrying the documents, the ones who are on the travels, those are the persons that we expect to come forward and do what is right for Trinidad and Tobago. Come forward and tell us what it is that was going on, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the next point I'd like to deal with is the view of the CPC. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, Mr. McIntyre Senior Counsel, at the time in 2015, provided an advice based on a bill at that time. I have laughed, and it is ridiculous to listen at times to what is being said, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They say no changes were made, but the change that was made, and just to go back in time to give the public the full context, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the bill that was first brought in 2015 that went to a Joint Select Committee, that the CPC's advice was based on, had no constitutional provision in it. It had no constitutional protection. It did not provide for the protection on a special majority. The CPC then said, well, hold on, the bill, without any constitutional protection, infringes constitutional rights. At that time, there was a debate because all of the legislation that was looked at through all of the jurisdictions that made up that bill, Jamaica, Malaysia, Australia, Malta, none of them, and all of them have written constitutions, had any constitutionality provision in it. Not a single one of them, not Jamaica, Malaysia, Malta, none of them. But the CPC was of the view and opinion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that the bill that was before this Joint Select Committee required a special majority. The bill that we've been debating over the last 2 days, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it may surprise some if they've been listening to the debate and hearing about this CPC's advice and about the breach of constitutionality, starts off with the insertion of the special majority provision. So the big change is that between the bill that the CPC was looking at and the one that we're currently debating is that the Attorney General has inserted the constitutional protection provision. So therefore, to say that it was not answered, it was not dealt with, again, a completely false misrepresentation of the reality of what we're debating here. Furthermore, to refer to and to have senior counsel refer to section 13(1) of the Constitution and talk about proportionality. Just for the public, Mr. Deputy Speaker, section 13(1) says, an act to which this section applies may expressly declare that it shall have effect, even though inconsistent with sections 4 and 5. Pause. That is exactly what this bill has. This bill has the provision of that declaration at the start of 13(1). And it goes on and says, and if any such act does so declare, which this bill does, it shall have effect accordingly, unless that act is shown not to be reasonably justifiable in a society that has proper respect for the rights and freedoms of the individual. Mr. Deputy Speaker, sorry. What that means is you look at other jurisdictions. You look at other like jurisdictions around the world to see what is the law that they have brought into play. And you look, that is the test. That is how it is tested in the courts. And maybe I would let the vast majority who have not practiced in the courts get away with the submission, but not a senior counsel. Because the way the court applies section 13(1) is it looks at other jurisdictions to see what is applicable and whether in those societies they have similar provisions. And as I just said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I say it here today for the Hansard, and for if anybody decides to take it to court, all of the legislation that we looked at in order to prepare this bill from Malaysia, from Malta, from Jamaica, from Canada, Australia, and all of those Commonwealth jurisdictions, not a single one of them took the precaution that this Attorney General has taken and inserted a need for constitutional protection. So I can say without a doubt that if this were tested in court, it would pass the section 13(1) test, because it is reasonably justifiable by the fact that all of those Commonwealth jurisdictions have similar law. What that is meant to do is to protect you from having a law that has come out of the blue. It's fallen from somewhere that you can find no other jurisdiction that has similar provisions. Every single provision in this bill and in this proposed act, Mr. Deputy Speaker, has come from a Commonwealth jurisdiction where the law has been passed, is being applied, is being implemented, utilized without constitutional protection that we have imposed on it. So again, that submission is a completely baseless one in law. Another point that was made, Mr. Deputy Speaker, on that same, the second half of that point that was being made is with respect to section 20 and the end of the submission of Siparia, the member for Siparia, that what you're doing is you're breaching the Constitution because what you're allowing is a person, an employee, to give evidence, to blow the whistle on its employer or something that has taken place in breach of confidentiality provisions, and then to somehow be sacrosanct from any criminal charge against them or any civil action. Mr. Deputy Speaker, again, a completely wrong submission, completely false submission. And I turn to clause 20. Clause 20 of the bill says, subject to subsection 3, nothing in this part shall prevent the institution of criminal proceedings against a whistleblower where the whistleblower was the perpetrator of or an accomplice in any improper conduct. So the person that being spoken about there is captured. There is no protection in this. If you have breached, if you are part of the act, etc., the immunity is not a complete immunity. If you have committed an act on your part, if you've carried the handbag with the money or you've carried the wire transfer in your handbag with the scarf. It doesn't give you full immunity, but still come and talk to us. A deal could be worked out.
Speaking time has elapsed. You have an additional 15 minutes. You care to avail yourself?
Yes, please, Mr. Deputy
Proceed.
Speaker. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in a very short period of time, what we've done is dismantle every single submission that we've heard repeated over and over and over in the last 2 days. And we've shown, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that every single one of them is baseless in fact, baseless in law, and in fact, what it is in my respectful submission is the dog whistling and the fear-mongering. And we've heard it repeatedly. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what I tell the population, and I tell the people, as a representative, as a person for Port of Spain North, the people of Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, is have nothing to fear with this legislation. Like the other legislation that is directed to fighting corruption, this is being done to protect the future of Trinidad and Tobago. This is being done to protect and to provide opportunities for the young children in Trinidad and Tobago. Because when you see billions of dollars are misappropriated from a treasury and hundreds of millions of dollars go missing, and I've heard the laughing at when my colleagues have submitted and when the Honorable Prime Minister submitted the savings that have been made. One contract alone, an interchange, $300 million saved.
Mr.
Yeah, jump up
Deputy Speaker,
again.
55(1)B, we've heard about these projects and about these contracts and about these contractors. 55(1)B.
Member, kindly move on, please.
Thank you. So the point is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that when these hundreds of millions of dollars were misappropriated, billions of dollars are misappropriated, legal fees going up to the tune of $1.4 billion with misappropriation, we are providing a safe path, a safe haven, and protection for those who have a conscience. That's the best way to put it. Well said. Those who have a conscience for the future of Trinidad and Tobago, and to provide a future and opportunity for the children of Trinidad and Tobago in the future. That is what this bill, in a nutshell, is about, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Just one last thing I'd like to correct. Unfortunately, the member for Siparia has left, probably to caucus. That incident that took place in 2013 with the Solicitor General, I would like the public to understand what the Office of Solicitor General means. In the Attorney General's office, the highest public officer.
Discussion there, I am. The discussion with the Minister of Finance, I'm privy to it. I'm privy to it, please.
Thank you very much.
The speaker is right next to the Minister of Finance.
I am. I'm the speaker. Person speaking is who he means. The Solicitor General is the highest public officer in the Office of the Attorney General, highest legal officer. In 2013, what the facts are, that the then Solicitor General, Ms. Donaldson Honeywell, went to her line minister, the Attorney General, and said, look, I've unearthed something that is not looking right here. I've unearthed what seems to be a scheme in the prisons, a scheme where I'm seeing cut and paste of witness statements. It's so sloppy a job of these witness statements that the same facts are being utilized throughout all of the proceedings being filed by a couple attorneys, by 2 attorneys. They're filing these actions over and over against the state on behalf of prisoners. Mr. Attorney General, something is wrong here and it needs to be investigated. Blanket silence, nothing. And that is why the Solicitor General then wrote to who is above a line minister, who has the ultimate accountability for a cabinet, the Prime Minister. She didn't start by writing to the Prime Minister. She wrote to the then Attorney General, Anand Ram Logan, completely ignored, then wrote to the member for Siparia as the Prime Minister. Ram Logan, take a look at this. You know who is the lawyer that was being accused of the cut and paste? You know who is the lawyer that the Solicitor General, the highest public officer, legal officer in the land of Trinidad and Tobago, dealing with a crime, a scheme being perpetrated on the prison system of Trinidad and Tobago was? Gerald Ramdeen. It was Gerald Ramdeen.
Please, if that matters.
Now, I got 48-1 and I got 49-1. Chief Whip, which one would you like on the table?
49, please.
49.
That's not sub judice. There are no court action yet.
Now, one second. Chief Whip, your leader of the opposition identified that same topic in her debate, and the member now is, I presume, trying to go down that road. So let me hear him, and I'll give you a little ruling shortly. Proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we heard from the Honourable Member for Siparia a short while ago. She raised the context within which a complaint arrived at her. But what the population needs to know is that we've heard an admission in 2013, a complaint was received from the Solicitor General to the then Prime Minister, now Leader of the Opposition. The complaint identified who the persons being complained were. And what did Siparia then do? She made him a member of the Senate. Made Mr. Gerald Ramdeen a member of the Senate for this that is currently being investigated. It's not sub judice because it's not before the court as yet. I just needed to say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the taxpayers paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars in those circumstances. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to wind up and to conclude my contribution, I say to the population of Trinidad and Tobago, this whistleblowing bill is an important pillar in the fight against corruption. There is nothing to fear, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, with respect to this whistleblowing legislation, unless you have committed an act or engaged in acts of corruption. To those who witnessed it, to those who have a conscience, to those who care about the future of Trinidad and Tobago, and in particular the children of Trinidad and Tobago, we beseech you, with or without this whistleblowing legislation, do your civic duty to Trinidad and Tobago. Come forward and tell the right authorities, the law enforcement authorities, the Attorney General's office, or if this legislation is passed, any one of these designated authorities, the truth, provide the way, tell us where the fingerprints can be found, where the footprints would have been, and save the future of Trinidad and Tobago. Save us from the taxpayers and the Treasury having to see the misappropriation of billions of dollars more. I thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
I recognize the Attorney General.
Thank you. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wish to start off by thanking my colleague, the Minister of National Security, for an excellent response. So excellent was it that he's actually put a lot of what I needed to put on the wind-up on the record. So I concur with the vast majority of submissions made, and I think I only need to add a few points to it. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me jump directly into constitutionality in a way that just needs to be slightly enlarged from the perspective of my colleague, the Minister of National Security. The member for Siparia, the leader of the opposition, in making a submission to this Honourable House, says there is no way that the UNC is going to support this legislation. The member for Pointe-a-Pierre says we are now seeing the puzzle that the Attorney General has put together come to life. And that caused me to pause. And I want to know what is so troubling for the opposition. What would cause the leader of government, the Chief Whip, the member for Pointe-a-Pierre, to say in that stark manner that he did, that we are now seeing the puzzle that the Attorney General and that the government has constructed come together. You see, sometimes Freud was right. The slip happened so innocently from the mouths of certain people that you only need to look a little bit harder at the situation to understand what is causing panic and fear amongst certain members of the society. Echoed here in the benches opposite us, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So, Siparia says, on behalf of the entire bench, no way, not supporting the legislation. It is unconstitutional. Siparia says that the unconstitutionality lies insofar as section 13, 1 and 2 of the Constitution say that it must be reasonably justifiable in a society such as Trinidad and Tobago, and that even though you have a 3/5 majority, that you're not going to have this thing saved. Exactly. The Honorable Prime Minister is hitting the nail on the head. Proportionality in law, reasonably justifiable. First limb, exactly as Minister of National Security said. The courts will look to other jurisdictions to see what happens in those jurisdictions as examples of proportionality. But the 1976 Republican Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago is rather unique. Unlike some other jurisdictions, we have no exceptions for national security purposes. In Jamaica, they can pass a law with constitutional majority, and they can say in the context of their constitution, no majority required for national security purposes. We go a little bit further. We require degrees of entrenchment. And entrenchment, the level to which you are protected, is set out in section 54 of the Constitution. Now, I want to underscore this. I can respectfully excuse every member opposite, save Siparia, for the contributions made. And I join the Minister of National Security in underlining the fact that senior counsel has an obligation to assist on the law. And senior counsel cannot misrepresent the law. You can say you don't agree with a point, but you cannot misrepresent the law. And let me give you two examples of a gross dereliction of duty from an inner member of the bar. Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me remind you what goes along for members of the inner bar. When you are given senior counsel by virtue of the Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago deeming you fit to be a member of the inner bar, let me repeat that. The Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago must deem it fit to give silk. We have an honorable member opposite, Siparia, who has silk. I'll pause there at the irony of it. To say that the gift of silk comes with it the ability, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
What's the relevance?
You might learn something. If you keep it secret, you might learn something. Overruled. Proceed.
Coming from the inner bar, when you have silk, and I'm talking about the need to not misrepresent the law, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you are entitled to charge extra money to people. You are the recipient of enlarged awards for costs. Junior counsel charges 2/3 of the fees of senior counsel. And when they give an award for costs, you're given an enlarged amount of money for costs. So listen to the two examples of a dereliction of duty on constitutionality and other provisions. And I'll tell you why I'm being as scathing as I am on the Leader of the Opposition. Point number one, I'll deal with the most obvious one, the smaller of the 2 points. The Leader of the Opposition, the member for Siparia, learned senior counsel, past Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, past Minister of Legal Affairs, past Minister of Education, past Attorney General on a second occasion, came to this Parliament and says, in relation to constitutionality, that she is violently upset deeply concerned that Section 7(6), as a point raised by nobody, breaches the Constitution. The honourable member said that the Constitution was going to be breached because 7(6) says this: a disclosure made in relation to a member of Parliament shall not amount to a breach of privilege. The member went on to quote what Carney East had to say, went on to quote what I had to say, went on to quote my own contribution, and then made the following most astounding submission in law. Listen to what the Leader of the Opposition, senior counsel, member of the Inner Bar had to say as to why this bill is so violently flawed. The honourable member said that this bill was going to impliedly amend the Constitution. Let me repeat that. The Leader of the Opposition, senior counsel, said that this bill is going to impliedly amend the Constitution. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Lord God Almighty, help me to understand that submission, because I am most in need of trying to understand that. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Madam Speaker, forgive me. Madam Speaker, I want to know if the honourable member has ever bothered to crack the pages of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Never. Just crack the pages.
Never.
Hazard a chance to maybe read the context of the Constitution.
Never.
Listen to this. The honourable member went so far as somebody having written, I would imagine, her researcher, Section 13 of the Constitution. Reasonably justifiable, stop, close the book. Oh Lord. Section 54 of the Constitution. Alteration of this Constitution is the marginal note. Subject to the provisions of this section, Parliament may alter any of the provisions of this Constitution in a particular manner. And Section 55, which is what the Leader of the Opposition was referring to as being impliedly amended by Section 7(6), Clause 7(6). Clause 7(6), the honourable member went on to say, runs to the root of democracy. Parliamentary privilege is the cornerstone. How could this government be amending parliamentary privilege, effectively throwing it out the window? Because Section 55 of the Constitution says that you have privileges and immunity in Parliament for members whilst they are in the course of exercising their duties. Members of Parliament don't have a blanket privilege. Members of Parliament have a specific form of privilege. In a particular place, in a particular context. But listen to this one. The honourable member, in making that argument by senior counsel, couldn't bother to look at Section 54. It just comes literally a few lines before Section 55. Listen to what Section 54 of the Constitution says. Insofar as any law purports to effectively alter this section, and I'll read several sections, the one that jumps out here, Section 55, Madam Speaker. Section 55. I'm reading from Section 54, subsection 3B. Insofar as you want to amend Section 55, which is the privileges, a bill for an act under this section shall not be passed by Parliament unless it is supported at the final vote thereon in the House of Representatives by the votes of not less than 3/4 of all the members of this House. And in the Senate, by votes of not less than 2/3 of the members of the Senate. And listen to the chorus from Pointe-à-Pitre. She said that.
Said no such thing.
If she said that, why is she referring to a 3/5 majority, an implied amendment?
No such thing.
The argument makes absolutely no sense. It is intellectually vapid to say that a 3/5 majority bill could impliedly amend Section 55 of the Constitution when Section 54 says you must do it by 3/4 majority. And that is the quality of legal argument offered by the member for Siparia, senior counsel, so gifted by the Honourable Prime Minister, who then considered it fit to offer silk in that fashion. So, Madam Speaker, let's go to the second egregious breach of the Constitution. Yes, please.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 15.5, I beg to move that the House to continue to sit until the conclusion of the matter before it.
Honorable members, the question is that this House continue to sit until the conclusion of its business. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it, Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll go to the second dereliction of duty for Silk. And I say that with the greatest of respect because I'm singling out the category of senior counsel in this debate. The Honourable Member for Siparia goes on to say that this law is unconstitutional. The Honourable Member was properly and squarely addressed by the Minister of National Security for all of the reasons given. But I want to remind us, constitutionality as passing muster under Section 13(2) of the Constitution is rooted in proportionality. Proportionality is the phrase you use to say that your society will uphold it because it values things like that. And proportionality in the umpteen cases that define it has three limbs. One, there must be a legitimate aim. Two, the bill must have a rational connection to the aim. Three, the bill must go no further than it ought to go in terms of infringing the rights. What is the legitimate aim in this country? And I want to thank the Honourable Prime Minister for putting it squarely the way he did to me. The Honourable Prime Minister, in his contribution, reminded the population of the 2017 FIU report, $22.5 billion in suspicious activities and suspicious transactions. Let me repeat that. Half of the annual amount of money that this country could earn, because we earn about $45 billion a year, half of the money that this country earns is in suspicious transactions for 1 year. This country is crying out for salvation. This country is most exposed in the public sector. The private sector has a certain amount of management, but it is the public sector as the largest spender of money in this country that is most exposed. And the leader of the opposition cannot see that as a legitimate aim, with a rational connection, with the least intrusive mechanism. Really? But let me ask the leader of the opposition this. One of the qualification limbs for proportionality is that the laws of the country recognize laws of this type. Correct. In other words then, do you have another law in your country that does kind of the same thing? Are you going so far off the boundary that this is so brand new? Madam Speaker, we have our website. We have printed laws. They give us the laws of Trinidad and Tobago for free as parliamentarians. You could pull it up on your phone, on your iPad. You could ask an orderly here for any volume of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. You stand up day and night and chastise the Minister of Finance about the public procurement laws in this country, knowing fully well that the regulator has to discharge that function and the government is urging it, but you couldn't be bothered to read the public procurement law? You couldn't? So what does the public procurement law say? Act number 1 of 2015. Again, at the feet of senior counsel Siparia. Prohibition of victimization. Let's go. The public procurement law is an act number 1 of 2015. It defines, what does it define? It defines a few very important things. It says what a public body is. A public body includes a body, corporate or unincorporated entity in relation to any function, project, scheme or arrangement which involves the use by it of public money. What does that mean? Anybody that gets government money. A private body that gets government money is a public body. 2, the procuring entity is defined in this law, means a public body engaged in procurement proceedings. 3, the public money has to be treated in a particular way. But when you get down to the public procurement law and you get to sections 40, section 41, section 42, Madam Speaker, Look at what it says. A person shall not be, I'm reading from section 40, a person shall not be dismissed, suspended, demoted, disciplined, harassed, denied a benefit, or otherwise negatively affected because A, he is acting in good faith and on the basis of reasonable belief, has notified DPP, Police, Integrity Commission, or the office that his employer or any other person has contravened about this act. Let me translate that quickly. The public procurement legislation has equal material to this whistleblowing legislation. So Siparia couldn't figure that out? It is embarrassing, Madam Speaker, to be subjected to the advice of Siparia.
45 minutes of nothing.
45 minutes of serious misrepresentation and shortcomings on the law. I have to protest on behalf of every right-thinking citizen in this country against the advocacy of Siparia. And I must demonstrate, as I have done, from the laws of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, that her arguments, the members' arguments, are to be rejected out of hand. So let's strip past constitutionality for a moment. Having intellectually rubbished the arguments put at the government, destroyed them, let's now turn to a few things. You know, I really do wish, I enjoyed the contributions coming from Shogunas West. Showed some research, good delivery. Having a hard case to deliver, the best thing to do is to make it sound good. So the honorable member for Shogunas West gave a good batting. It sounded all right.
Look like you believe it.
It sounded, but when you strip it down to what it actually says, I couldn't get to a point, but it was eloquently delivered. So let me put it this way. What I find a little bit disturbing from my friend Shogunas West and Siparia and every other speaker that spoke to the issue of retrospectivity. Madam Speaker, it's true that this law has, in clause 5, this act applies to any disclosure made after the coming into force of this act, irrespective of whether or not the conduct or the improper conduct to which the disclosure relates occurred before or after. But Madam Speaker, the advice coming from the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, Mr. McIntyre, specifically, and albeit in relation to an earlier bill, said, consequently, that clause is not objectionably retrospective and does not infringe the right of the individual to protection of the law. In other words then, honorable members, do us the favor of reading the whole piece of advice. If Shogunas West did, Siparia certainly did not. Again, I invite whomever prepares the notes for Siparia, exercise a little bit more diligence before one adopts a self-righteous approach on what the law ought to be and is declared to be.
Busy these days,
Madam Speaker, we've dealt with the issue of retrospectivity. The issue of contractual voiding was another one that came up. Now, I've touched upon it in the context of section 27, clause 27 of the bill. I've demonstrated that clause 27 in treating with the particulars of avoiding of contracts. That clause 27 is a particular clause. On the face of it, it appears to sidestep contractual obligations. I've shown that the Public Procurement Act does the same thing, but I want to put clause 27 on its proper footing. It is nothing of what Siparia said it is. Nothing at all. Listen to what clause 27 says. Any provisions in any contract of service or other agreement between an employer and employee, as defined, is void insofar as it A, purports to exclude any provisions of this act. What does that mean? For you to have the protection for the contract to be void or voidable, it must be that you are making a proper disclosure in proper circumstances. And if you don't make a proper disclosure in proper circumstances, you are not covered by this provision. And therefore, it is again a dereliction of senior counsel's duty in telling the Parliament what the law ought to say.
That's right, that's right.
And it must be rejected out of hand. Madam Speaker, there's very little else to say in terms of constitutionality, void or voidable. The architecture of this legislation is a hybrid approach to a decentralized system. This law does not require every small entity to have a public procurement law type of structure. This law does not require a two-person entity or a one-person entity or a snow cone vendor to hire a whistle protection person to manage it. And the Honourable Prime Minister spoke about the designation. The fact is, are we far off from any other law? Madam Speaker, under the procurement legislation, Act number 1 of 2015, there is no qualification described for a procuring entity officer. So under the public procurement law, fathered by the UNC when in government, with the assistance of the PNM in Joint Select Committee for a whole 5 years, the public procurement law does not have a qualification for a person to exercise function. So why should the whistle protection law have it? And the reason is, in the public procurement legislation, we realized that one size could not fit all. And therefore, we provided in the clauses of the Whistle Protection Bill, you can have an internal unit, but if you don't have an internal unit, or if you don't trust that internal unit, or there's a conflict of interest in that internal unit, go by the 21 people identified in the schedule as a designated authority. But all of a sudden, everybody in the UNC, everybody in the opposition wants to have prescriptions and definitions and job title and security of tenure and salary. It wasn't good enough for the public procurement law that they spent a whole 5 years and 3 months trying to create without implementing it, even though they had a special majority for the entire time. It wasn't good enough for that law, but all of a sudden, help us. Chicken Little, sky going to fall, whistleblowers watch out. And Madam Speaker, let me say this. I noticed something that caused me deep concern in the contributions opposite. The reference to the Jamaican aspects of effectively a snitch affidavit, whistleblower affidavit. I heard that, Madam Speaker, and I cringed on behalf of every citizen in this country. What do you mean by snitch have to die in this country? What do you mean by whistleblowers? What did Pointe-a-Pierre mean in saying that this government is going to hang its hat on clause 23? What did Pointe-a-Pierre mean in referring to the offences provision in clause 23? That he knew that the government had some ulterior purpose. Madam Speaker, this law frowns upon inducement. This law specifically says, as the Minister of National Security put, in clause 20, the antithesis to section 19 to clause 19 exists. You, the perpetrator of the crime, are not given a get out of jail card. At best, you can have some degree of mitigation in your circumstance if a court of law considers it appropriate. But I condemn out of hand the position repeated over and over again, and worse yet, catalyzed, amplified on public platforms coming from the UNC. Madam Speaker, I heard the leader of the opposition talk about my constituency, Gulfview, where events happened over the weekend. And as a member of the National Security Council, I am confident that when the truth as to what happens comes out, people will say thank you to the Commissioner of Police. And I won't say more than that. But to hear the leader of the opposition in the public domain tell people this Attorney General and this government passing laws without 3/5 majority that are allowing homes to be raided in circumstances alleged to be in an unconstitutional or unlawful fashion is not only a dereliction of duty, it is exactly what the Minister of National Security said. It is blowing a dog whistle of the worst kind.
Division.
What does the leader of the opposition mean by yellow house and ethnic versions when spoken outside this parliament?
Police action.
Why is it that when similar action happened in Westmoreland and Glencoe, no dog whistle was blown? Or when it happens in Sealot or Laventille or Marabella train line, no dog whistle is blown? The laws of this country is only for a few. Madam Speaker, this law, as promoted by this government, subjects this government to the application of this law retroactively. We didn't bring it in year 1 or year 2 or year 3 because we were putting together the pieces of the puzzle. How do you expect a law to work if your criminal justice system can't work? If you don't have rules of court, if you don't have a criminal division, if you don't have plea bargaining legislation to encourage whistleblowers to step forward and tell the truth. So in bringing this law as we do now, in the Prime Minister today in Prime Ministerial Question Time saying the AV drilling matter is in the hands of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and if you want to take the case at the highest, which we don't accept coming from the opposition, that's a P&M board, Petrotrin, referring a P&M matter to the DPP via senior counsel. In other words, then, what is good for the goose is good for the gander. But that is not said by anybody else.
They will never do that.
When we had a contract in NP in 2010 for garbage trucks in a particular contractor's equation, nobody went and referred that to the DPP.
Live in the house.
Live in the house of all.
I won't call people names here. I'm not inclined to do things like that. Population remembers. But this Prime Minister in this government made sure that the law applies to all. And I want to reject out of hand completely any allegation that this law is to suit P&M purpose. One thing that is sure, we are people in revolving doors, and these doors turn quickly. Our obligation is to improve the strength of the system of governance. The system of governance applies to all of us. Civil asset explain your wealth law applies to all of us. Plea bargaining applies to all of us. Whistleblowing protection applies to all of us. Police investigations, and in doing a police manpower audit, and in doing a police prosecutorial audit, and in funding the TTPS to create a division of the type that has never been seen before, with complete arm's length distance, respectful of Section 123A of the Constitution, supporting a prosecutorial white-collar unit, transferring the Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau out of...
Attorney General, your original time is now expired. You have 15 more minutes to complete your contribution if you wish.
Should it please you?
You may proceed.
I won't be much longer. Transferring the Anti-Corruption Investigation Bureau out of the hands of the government, the Attorney General, but more than that, Madam Speaker, judge us by what we bring. What is the government's position as it relates to whistleblowing, as it ties into the Income Tax Amendment Act, where we had to fight tooth and nail to give the police the power to treat with prosecution of income tax offenses as they relate to money laundering and proceeds of crime? Our position, yes. Opposition's position, no. P&M position, government's position on FATCA, on Global Forum, yes. Opposition's position, no, until they have to get it kicking and screaming with public anxiety and calls from the banking sector where the term death by 1,000 cuts came about. You see, Madam Speaker, the record is there for all who want to see. Today, we have a very unusual situation. This government is time and time again told, the standing mantra, more consultation, take it to Joint Select Committee, bring a 3/5 majority, wheel and come again. Why are you hurrying? On this occasion, the first bill that we brought was simple majority. Why? Because we have due process in the bill. It's a court of law to decide if you get whistleblowing protection under due process within the descriptions of Baroness Hale in Surat, or you take Mirage, or you take the Court of Appeal in Trinidad and Tobago in Northern Construction. Any one of them say due process can save you from the need for a 3/5 majority, because not every entrenched right needs to be treated with a Section 13 position. We didn't listen to that. We said, out of an abundance of caution, we will insert the 3/5 majority clause. We will bring it out of the committee stage because, Madam Speaker, there is a particular talent that the opposition exercises in the committee when certain members of the opposition attend there. They can test the patience of the Lord God Almighty's best and finest. I will just say it that way. To sit down and listen to the positions that come out of the mouths of some of the members opposite is to test your patience beyond measure, Madam Speaker. So what did we do? We brought it out of committee. We brought it with a 3/5 majority. We are content that it matches up with the laws of Jamaica, Malta, umpteen jurisdictions, the United Kingdom, etc., Canada, the United States of America. We are the only country in the world, it seems, under the leadership of Siparia, who fighting not to bring witness protection legislation. The only country in the world that does not want to have whistleblower protection seems to be that country where the UNC's vote is required to pass the law, and they say no. So what will we do? As the Honorable Prime Minister says, there is nothing to replace a committee of the whole. There are 41 members present here, 41. In a committee of the whole, all of the bill can be considered. The 23 votes on this side are ready, willing, and able to pass this law. But just to tell you this, the population will judge the UNC tonight. The population will judge us tonight, as Carney Central says that. The population is crying out for justice. The population wants its value for money. Witness protection is a necessary strengthening of evidence. Evidence leads to prosecution. Prosecution leads to acquittal or conviction. Whistleblowing is one of the critical tools to get there. So, Madam Speaker, we are ready, willing, and able to sit all night in the committee stage. We have sat here for 2 days. We have not had notice of a single amendment from those opposite. We've spent 2 days on it. We understand that there may be an atmosphere of difficulty that prevails for some. On their side. On their side. That is not something to be cherished. There is a requirement for due process in this country, and you must respect the law within the confines of the law and the Constitution with the arm's length distancing. Madam Speaker, I will invite you, particularly at committee stage, to pay attention to the standing orders where we ought to have circulated amendments if there are to be any, because as the representative in the chair tonight, to handle the amendments, I'd like to have the best form of assistance with your guidance, both from members opposite and from members on this side. Madam Speaker, I beg to move.
Honourable members, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Combat Corruption and Other Wrongdoings by Encouraging and Facilitating Disclosures of Improper Conduct in the Public and Private Sector to protect persons making those disclosures from detrimental action, to regulate the receiving, investigating, or otherwise dealing with disclosures of improper conduct, and to provide for other matters connected therewith, be now read a second time. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Clerk.
A bill entitled An Act to Combat Corruption and Other Wrongdoings by Encouraging and Facilitating Disclosures of Improper Conduct in the Public and Private Sector, to protect persons making those disclosures from detrimental action, to regulate the receiving, investigating, or otherwise dealing with disclosures of improper conduct, and to provide for other matters connected therewith.
Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 68-1, I beg to move that the Whistleblower Protection Bill 2018 be committed to the Committee of the Whole.
Honorable members, the question is that the Whistleblower Protection Bill 2018 be committed to the Committee of the Whole. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. This House will now go into the Committee of the Whole to consider the bill clause by clause. Honorable members, might I inquire, seeing that I don't have any written amendments, do we take this bill en bloc or do we go clause by clause?
Should it please you, Madam Speaker, there are no amendments on the government's part and we've received no amendments from the opposition.
Whip, clause. Any amendments? Okay, good.
Clauses 1 to 29.
The question is that clauses 1 to 29 stand part of the bill. The question is that clauses 1 to 29 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. Clauses 1 to 29 now stand part of the bill.
The schedule.
The question is that the schedule stand part of the bill. The question is that the schedule now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. The schedule now stands part of the bill.
The preamble.
The question is that the preamble be approved. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Honorable members, the question is that the bill be now reported to the House. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. No. I think the ayes have it. Members, this committee meeting is now adjourned. The House shall resume. Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, may I inquire whether the whip is lifted?
We want to know who will talk.
Of the Leader of the Opposition?
Yes. Attorney General.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I wish to report that the Whistleblower Protection Bill 2018 was considered in Committee of the Whole and approved without amendments. I now beg to move that the House agree with the committee's report.
Honourable members, the question is that this House agree with the committee's report on the Whistleblower Protection Bill 2018. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Combat Corruption and Other Wrongdoings by Encouraging and Facilitating Disclosures of Improper Conduct in the Public and Private Sector to protect persons making those disclosures from detrimental action, to regulate the receiving, investigating, or otherwise dealing with disclosures of improper conduct, and to provide for other matters connected therewith, be forthwith read a third time and passed.
Honourable members, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Combat Corruption and Other Wrongdoings by Encouraging and Facilitating Disclosures of Improper Conduct in the Public and Private Sector to protect persons making those disclosures from detrimental action, to regulate the receiving, investigating, or otherwise dealing with disclosures of improper conduct, and to provide for other matters connected therewith, be forthwith read a third time and passed. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? No. I think the ayes have it. This bill requires a 3/5 special majority. Clap.
Mr. Al-Rawi.
Aye.
Dr. Rowley.
Aye.
Mrs. Robinson-Regis.
Aye.
Mr. Imbert.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mr. Dialsingh.
Yes.
Mr. Hines.
Yes.
Mr. Mitchell.
Aye.
Ms. Kojo.
Aye.
Mr. Garcia.
Yes.
Mrs. Critchlow Coburn.
Aye.
Mr. Ford.
Aye.
Mr. Dillon.
Aye.
Dr. Gatsby Dolly.
Aye.
Ms. MacDonald.
Yes.
Dr. Francis.
Yes.
Mrs. Jennings-Smith.
Aye.
Ms. Oliver.
Yes.
Mr. Antwine.
Yes.
Mr. Leons.
Yes.
Mr. Coffey.
Yes.
Mrs. Webster Roy.
Yes.
Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee.
No.
She's here.
Mrs. Persad-Bissessar.
No.
Dr. Ramachand.
No.
Mr. Karim.
No.
Dr. Tiwari.
No.
Dr. Munilal.
No.
Mrs. Nualo Hussain.
No.
Dr. Gopi Singh.
Absolutely no. In no circumstance.
Mrs. Gayadeen Gopi Singh.
No.
Mr. Indarsingh?
No.
Can't even marshal their own troops.
Dr. Khan?
Silence so that the clerks could accurately record the votes, please. Clerk.
Dr. Khan?
No.
Mr. Padara?
No way. No.
Dr. Bodo?
No.
Mr. Parry?
No.
Ms. Ramdial?
No to political witch hunt.
Ms. Ramdial, member for Couva North, just kindly, let's take your vote without your other comments. You would have had an opportunity to speak in the debate if you wished. Clerk.
Mr. Singh?
No.
I am not as obvious.
The result of the division is as follows: 22 members voting for, 16 members voting against, and there were no abstentions.
Take 4 years to bring it. Bring it up.
Honorable members, with a division, 22 members voting for, 16 members voting against, and no abstentions. The motion for the third reading of the Whistleblower Protection Bill 2018 is not approved. Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the House do now adjourn to Friday, the 10th day of May at 1:30 p.m., at which time we'll be doing private members' day. Can you tell us which motion we'll be doing, please?
One on the economy by Dr. Karani Central, Dr. Tewari.
Before I complete my motion, I'd like to indicate that on Wednesday we will have Standing Finance Committee, which of course is not a sitting, but I'm just letting the members know. 1:30.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do now adjourn to Friday, the 10th of May, 1:30 p.m. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned to Friday, 10th of May, 2019 at 1:30 p.m.